And we are back, IB Nation. Welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday. We got recruiting in the rearview mirror. We've got to focus on kind of what's coming up for Notre Dame. The Irish bounce back from a disappointing loss to Stanford with a convincing, albeit sometimes ugly, but convincing win over UNLV. The complaint from the Notre Dame UNLV game was you didn't score enough. You missed opportunities for it to be an even bigger blowout. That's definitely a place you'd rather be than where they were against Marshall. And Ryan, I want to kind of say something about this because the next 5 weeks presents Notre Dame with a huge opportunity. And this season has been very disappointing. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This has been a very disappointing season for Notre Dame. This team should have been much better than they are. There's no excuses, no backup quarterback this, all this other stuff, right? TCU's playing with their backup quarterback technically. You know, Max Dugan got beat out in the offseason by Chandler Morris, and so he came off the bench. But we're seeing teams go out there with backups, missing this guy, missing that guy, and winning football games. And Notre Dame should be better than they are, plain and simple. As sour of a taste as we have about that, the next 5 weeks present an opportunity either A, add to that negative feeling, or B, to change it. And so what we see over the next 5 weeks is Notre Dame gets a chance to play right now 3 teams that are currently ranked in the top 20. Syracuse being the lowest ranked team this upcoming weekend at number 16. They're only 16 because they lost on the road to Clemson by 6 this past weekend, 27-21, a game they led almost the entire game. Outplayed Clemson in a lot of different ways, just couldn't put the game away late. So they fell only 2 spots. Really. I think they were 14 going into the week. They only fell 2 spots to Clemson, who's number 5. Then, of course, Notre Dame plays Clemson the next week, and who's currently number 5. And Clemson will most likely stay at number 5 unless they move up if there's an upset because they have a bye week this week. So at worst, they're going to maybe drop a spot if somebody behind them blows somebody out, but or they could potentially move up a little bit. And then, of course, they end the season with USC, who currently is ranked 10th. USC is coming off of a bye week. Their schedule, they've got very winnable games coming up these next 2 weeks before their back-to-back stretch against UCLA and Notre Dame. So, Ryan, this isn't a statement of, gee, I'm predicting Notre Dame to win out because I don't have a freaking clue what this Notre Dame team is going to be from week to week, so I couldn't possibly predict that. But we are going to discuss the fact that there can be no debating that there is a huge opportunity in front of them over the next 5 weeks, and it starts on Saturday against Syracuse against what has been a really quality football team, but also a team that there's no doubt about it Notre Dame should be able to beat. Will they? No idea. Can they? Should they? Absolutely. And it would be one of those, it would be the first step towards really 4 steps, right? It's beat Syracuse, beat Clemson, handle your business against bad teams, and beat USC, right? 4 steps to them kind of salvaging the season because, as we've said before, you go back and look at USC back in 2016, USC after the first month of the season was not a very good football team. USC by the end of the year could play with anybody. 9-3 record, right? And we remember that team. We don't remember that team for the loss to Bama and Utah and Stanford. We remember that team for what they did down the stretch, beating a playoff team in Washington on the road by 2 touchdowns late in the season, going out and smacking Notre Dame at the end of the year, beating Penn State in one of the more entertaining Rose Bowls ever. That's what we remember. And it's the same thing as here with this Notre Dame team is we're gonna be able to look back and say, hey, this is the moment that they turn things around or not, right? I mean, those are the 2 options. And Syracuse here at number 16 has a great opportunity to be a first step to that because it is a ranked opponent. It would give Notre Dame a second win over a ranked opponent if they could do it. And as I said, this is a beatable, a winnable, very winnable game. UNLV, to me, Ryan, the thing that we have missed, in my opinion, in our frustration, because I'm frustrated with that game, they should have hung a 60 spot on UNLV. UNLV is not worse than Marshall, in my opinion.
No,
they're not.
They're
now,
not.
Jacob Brunfield not playing. They're a different kind of team. Marshall's better on defense. UNLV's better on offense. But they didn't play well, but they put UNLV away early, which is exactly what they should have done, but didn't do against Marshall. So even as disappointing as it was clear growth from where they were early. Now we're still waiting on them to take that final step to start playing like the team they're capable of and start racking up some W's against some quality opponents. and Syracuse is going to be that first chance to do that.
Well, I mean, Brian, we talked about whether it was the North Carolina defense or it is UNLV or whatever it is, what BYU ends up looking like now comparative to what Notre Dame thought they were going into that football game, is we've kind of have put those games on the back burner and said, okay, well, let's see it against a good team, right? Against a good opponent in a big game. And although Clemson and USC are going to be bigger games, Syracuse is a great indicator, man. If there has been legitimate growth, and how much legitimate growth there has been at certain spots, because this is a team that we just saw. I know that we have been, in the preseason and kind of throughout the season, I don't think this is the best Clemson team we've seen in the last couple of years, right? Like it's not a great Clemson team, but regardless, Syracuse took them down to the wire and they were winning for the majority of that football game, right? So when you look at it, this Syracuse team's tough. They're ready to play, and they're not going to just come in and be gun shy against a more talented Notre Dame team. Like they're going to come in to beat Notre Dame, and especially with Notre Dame going to Syracuse to play this football game. Syracuse is going to be jacked up. They're a good football team, top 20 in the country, like you said, sitting there at number 16. Only loss is the number 5 team in the country. It's a good Syracuse team, and this is a great test for Notre Dame because Syracuse is not going to roll over, man. This is not what we thought this game could be. Like, man, I think we both kind of thought Syracuse would be an improved team comparative to what they were last year, but nobody thought that they would be sitting here, with only one loss at this point in the season. So it's a great test, great start to the gauntlet, because if Notre Dame is going to change a narrative of sorts going down the stretch, this is the first step, man, because, again, there's a couple big games moving forward, but this is the first in a three sets of games that are going to show just how much growth this team has had, because the moral victories are out the door, man. Losing a close game to a top whatever team, top 10, top 20 team, like those things are done with, right? Like they're nothing that we want to kind of concern ourselves with anymore. If Notre Dame is really taking steps forward, they're going to come out and they're going to be decisive against this team, and they're going to be ready to play, because I know that Syracuse is going to be ready to play Notre Dame this weekend.
Oh, there's no doubt that Syracuse is going to come to play on Saturday, Ryan. I mean, zero doubt. Anyone that thinks Syracuse is going to come out this weekend and not be ready for this game is I mean, I'm not going to say anyone that thinks that, because I literally don't know of anyone that thinks that. I know of no one that thinks that they're not going to be ready to play. I'm sure that no one in the Goog better not feel this way. And I don't think that they do. I think they know the opportunity that's in front of them. I think they know what awaits them, and they know what Syracuse is going to bring, because this has been a Syracuse team that for the most part has won ugly this season. They benefited from Devin Leary being out in an ugly but convincing win over NC State. They won ugly against Purdue. They won ugly against Virginia. But you know what? I'll take an ugly win over any other kind of loss any day of the week. And that's what this team does. They know how to win because they're well coached this year. They're schemed up really well on both sides of the ball, and they play hard. And they got this little sawed-off nose guard that we're going to talk about, Kevin Darton. And this kid's like 5'11", 266. And I'm just watching him whoop center after center week after week with just quickness and effort and leverage. And that's who this Syracuse team is. Like, he, to me, is the epitome of who the Syracuse team is, right? Just he sums up this team. They're not the most talented team. They're not the biggest team, the strongest team, the fastest team, but they are tough. They play hard. And they're athletic to a degree. They're not like super athletic, but they have some athleticism in spots. And they are going to maximize their ability as a football team. And as we saw on Saturday against Clemson, they're if they weren't afraid of Clemson at Clemson, they're not going to be afraid of Notre Dame in the Carrier Dome. They're just not. So if Notre Dame's going to win this game, they're going to have to earn this win. It's not going to be a hangover game for Syracuse. It's not going to be anything like that. They're going to have to earn this win. And again, it's just that opportunity where this is a chance for Coach Freeman to kind of show, okay, yeah, we may have hit some bumps in the road early in my tenure. I'm not happy about it, but I was able to identify what the issues were and fix them. And that's going to be a big part of it. And as we kind of get into the week, we'll talk about which parts of the team have to play well. This is a big game for Tommy Rees. As I called you before the show, and I was like, dude, if Tommy Rees can just get his head straight and do what he needs to do with his football team and stop all the other nonsense, right? Just get your best players out there, use them correctly, and scheme this thing up and call this game the way you're capable of. This is a defense that can be moved on, right? This is a defense that doesn't match up great against Notre Dame, at least on paper. Now, can Notre Dame take advantage of those matchups? That's a whole different question. But it's one where it's there for the taking. Will they do it? I don't know. And that's the big question mark. And people need to understand the difference of what we're talking about here. There's a difference between talking about what Notre Dame is capable of and what Notre Dame will do. For example, I wrote the article at Irish Breakdown yesterday talking about how if Notre Dame runs the tables, simply talking about what's in front of them and what that would mean. People say, well, they're not capable of running the table. Well, they're certainly capable of running the table. If they play every week like they did against North Carolina, they'll beat all 5 teams that are left on their schedule. And maybe one of them would be close, right? Like, they're capable of it. What they're capable of and what they will do, two different things. They were capable of beating Stanford by 30. They didn't. They lost. Yep. They were capable of beating Marshall by 17 to 21 points at least. They were capable of it, but they didn't. They lost, right? And that's the thing. They were capable of, scoring more than 10 points against Ohio State. They didn't. That they lost, right? And so that's the question mark: is will there be a time this season, Ryan? And this is the great unknown about this team. Will there be a time this season where the light switches on, or not? Mm-hmm. We don't know the answer to that. But the opportunity is there, because the reason that I think this is important to discuss is because the one thing you cannot dismiss about this Notre Dame football team, and it drives me flipping nuts, they 100% play emotionally and schematically and technically to the level of their competition. Yes. They've played down to inferior opponents and they've played up to superior opponents. Their 2 best games this year were against the 2 best teams that they've played, against Ohio State and North Carolina. And if they can play like that on a consistent basis, they will beat a lot of teams. I mean, if they simply play like they did against BYU, they'll go 3-2, right? And they didn't play great against BYU. If they play like they did against North Carolina, they can run the table. But that's the thing, is we don't know what we're going to get from Notre Dame week after week after week. And at some point in time, that light's going to go on. Is it this season? Is it next season? I don't know the answer to that. But that is what in front of Mark Freeman. And it's something that if you end the season that way, all the momentum you lost, all the positive vibes you lost through the first 7 games are back. And that's the opportunity that awaits this team. And I was somewhat encouraged by the UNLV game in that a couple players and positions that I was concerned had checked out after Stanford played really well. So it gives me a glimmer of hope that this team realizes what's in front of it. And here's the thing. Here's a selling point for Marcus Freeman to some of the veterans. Hey, bro, when NFL scouts watch your film this season, what games do you think they're going to watch the most? Probably Ohio State, North Carolina, Syracuse, Clemson, and USC. So most of the games that teams are going to watch of you are on your schedule coming up. What are you going to show them? That's why I'm flat out say that to them. You got to give them something to play for. There's no conference championship. There's no playoff. You can't really talk about New Year's Six bowls. You're 4-6. You didn't receive a single vote last week in the top 25, nor should you have, by the way. You got to give them something to play for, Ryan. So that's kind of my long rant on that. This is where we're going to find out the ability of the leadership of this football team and the coach on this football team to motivate these players and give them something to play for, because they have a chance to leave their mark on this program, and they have a chance to leave their mark on Marcus Freeman's tenure. But what's that mark going to be? They're going to leave a mark, Ryan. It's just we don't know what kind of mark it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. I would say this, especially for the scouting side of things there, they call these money games, Brian. Like, this is the game where you make yourself some money. Like, these are one of those. Because to your point, you want to watch the best teams that Notre Dame plays on their schedule when you're kind of breaking them down. And Syracuse will probably end up being one of those, right? And I even think of, like, hey, Isaiah Foskey just had, 3 sacks against UNLV, like, nice number, right? Well, this week, and I know we're not going too in depth on Syracuse right now, but he's going to be playing an offensive tackle, Matthew Bergeron, who's going to get drafted pretty high, man. So this is the matchup that a lot of scouts want to see from an individual to individual perspective. And then after that, Brian, like, that's one of my biggest thing that we've talked about so much is the fact that, like, I feel like I didn't adequately adjust my thoughts to, like, how much of an adjustment Marcus Freeman would have as a first-year head coach, like the mistakes that you make, the adjustments that you need to make along a stretch of a season, that type of stuff. I mean, I feel like I missed the boat on some of that to a degree. But
because Oregon is the exact reason why you say, no, you didn't miss the boat. They didn't do what they were capable of. I mean, you can't say, well, 36-year-old defensive coordinator, never been a head coach, they're going to make mistakes. Well, then what's the excuse with Oregon, right? I mean, they got a transfer quarterback, a guy that you thought wasn't very good and wasn't coming into the season. I mean, this is a kid who couldn't win big games. This is a kid who just had these colossal flops, right? They have like one of their top running backs is not even a transfer from Oregon. Like 2 of their top 4 pass catchers are true sophomores. I mean, they lost a lot of talent off last year's team too, right? I mean, so you can't say, well, I misjudged the adjustment it would take, because there's another team with a very similar situation that is doing what they needed to do. You can't anticipate. Well, I think the offensive coordinator is going to do a crap job the first 7 games, right? I don't think you can anticipate that. I think all their best players are going to regress this year. And you can't predict that. So I'm fine saying that I'm wrong about stuff, and I would hope that you would always do so too. I was wrong about Tommy Rees, flat out, 100% dead wrong on the job I thought he would do. But I'm going to push back on that one, because I think what you're doing is you're taking the blame for something that wasn't something you should have assumed. In my opinion, you shouldn't have assumed that a coach that was here. And the difference is Dan Lanning wasn't even at Oregon last year. He didn't even know the personnel as well. They got embarrassed in the opener against Georgia. Embarrassed. And that team immediately bounced back, right? So clearly they knew what buttons to push. So I don't think you can just say, oh, first-year coach. Look what Mike Elko's doing at Duke.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so for every Marcus Freeman and even worse, Mario Cristobal and Brent Venables, there's a Dan Lanning, there's a Mike Elko, who are very similar situations that have, to me, overachieved with their football teams this season. So I think this is more about they didn't handle their business than people assuming wrongly that, or missing the boat on what was there, what we should have assumed that these things would have happened, because there are similar instances where those things didn't happen. So why did they happen there and here? Right? I mean, why didn't Oregon have the same issue? Oregon's offensive coordinator is not that much older than Tommy Rees.
No.
He hasn't been calling plays that much longer than Tommy Rees. Right? So I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate your willingness to admit that you were wrong, but I don't think you were in this instance. I don't think the problem wasn't our expectations. The problem is they haven't done a very good job in instances where coaches in similar situations. I mean, does somebody want to tell me that Mike Elko walked into a better situation than Marcus Freeman? Does anybody really want to tell me that Oregon's roster top to bottom is just this great roster top to bottom? No.
Can't do that.
So I appreciate your willingness to do that, Ryan, but I'm not going to let you fall on your sword this time. This wasn't a you problem.
It was a them problem. It wasn't a me problem.
It was a them problem.
Man. I'll take it.
Yeah.
One thing I am looking forward to seeing, though, Brian, is not only just from the coaching staff perspective on how you rebound and how you kind of continue to get through this adversity. I also want to see who the leaders are on this football team, man. Like, I feel like I've talked about this in nauseum every single podcast that we've done, but it's true for me. Like, there's a lack of juice in a lot of areas. I'm still waiting to see who are the de facto leaders of this program, and not even only for 2022, but it doesn't have to be a captain. Like, I don't need to see Isaiah Foskey necessarily be this guy, right? Like, I need to see some guys, though, that take ownership and withstand the adversity to go to where you need to go, right? So whether that is a freshman, sophomore, up to a senior, I don't care who it is. I just want whoever it is on this football team to show their face down the stretch here, right? Going against a Syracuse, going against a Clemson, going against a USC. Who are the guys that are going to stand up with their chest puffed out, even though you're 4-3 right now, and say, doesn't matter what we've done up until now, today it's different. Moving forward, it's different. Who are those guys? Because I don't know who those guys are, but that's what I'm most looking forward to, is I want to just kind of sit back and watch who brings the juice, who comes to play in a big moment, who comes to play in a big game, who's going to be that difference maker when the lights are the brightest. And I think that's what Notre Dame has the opportunity to down the stretch here, right? You have 3 games that are going to be paramount and important games and are going to be high-profile real games where you could look at and say, in those big moments, who are going to be the players that are going to stand up and say, I'm big enough for this moment. I am better than the person across from me. That's what I want to see, is which players are ready to hit that adversity and keep going forward. Because I'm not sure who those guys are, but the next level leaders on this team, I think, will show themselves on Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And that's what's going to be fun about it, right? Hopefully, at least anyway, fun. But that's going to be the big question mark. And that's how they can present themselves. So that's what awaits them. Look, if you can't get fired up for this kind of game, then there's much bigger problems, and it's not just coaching, it's players. I mean, look, there comes a point in time where I don't care what your coaches are saying or doing. You've got an opportunity on national television against a ranked opponent to go out and show something. And we've heard for years about Notre Dame players, hey, we didn't care about the coaches, this was about us. Well, they need to tap back into that mantra, Ryan, and that's something I'm looking forward to seeing. Now, the team that they're doing that against is a good football team. This is a good Syracuse football team. It is not a team, to me, that is a world beater. It is not a team, to me, honestly, it's not as dangerous of a team as the one they played in 2018, but it's a completely different type of football team. That was a high-octane scoring team that had really good ends and a good secondary. It was a passing-oriented team with Eric Dungy. Eric Dungy was probably the biggest running threat on that football team. This team is more of a run-the-football type of team. Their quarterback is a good runner, but Sean Tucker's a good runner. Their young freshman running back, who doesn't play a ton, is averaging almost 9 yards a carry. But this is a team built around playing physical, tough defense. Now, the one thing that's similar is the secondary. Yep. Syracuse has strangely been producing really good secondaries for most of the last decade, especially the last half of the last decade. That 2018 team had like Andre Cisco. They had a really quality secondary. This secondary is arguably the best on Notre Dame's schedule, arguably. And the thing is their best player hasn't even been playing great so far this year. Garrett Williams. It's other guys that have stepped up and played well. The Rutgers transfers had a really good season so far. So this is a quality football. Yep. This is a quality football team, Ryan, that is certainly beatable, but you're going to have to earn it. They're going to make you earn it, and that's the thing I like about this Syracuse football team.
Mentally tough, man, and it's a interesting one too, Brian, because I mean, for me, you watch this Syracuse team, you're just kind of like they came off of a rough season over the last couple years. I mean, they've been down for a little bit, and I mean, there was a lot of people that were talking before the season, like, is their coach on the hot seat? Like, is Dino Babers a guy that if it has another down year is out of the door? And
he was on the hot seat to a degree, yeah.
Brian, when you have that type of situation, teams just pack it in, man. Like that, this could have been like one of those lame duck situations where you're like halfway through the year, like, Dino's out. Like that could have been the situation that you're in. But this
I got to get myself ready for where I'm transferring to, or who the next coach is going to be, or whatever the case may be. Yep.
Exactly. Especially with so many of these kids, because I mean, Garrett Williams is probably going to be in the 2023 NFL draft. Sean Tucker is probably going to be in the 2023 NFL draft. Their best players are draft eligible players. So especially in that situation where they only are guaranteed to be here probably for this season, a lot of those kids could have just been like, I'm just going to look out for myself. It doesn't really matter about, Coach Babers or the program, but you can tell just the toughness that Coach Babers and the coaching staff this season has instilled in this team, Brian, because I mean, Sean Tucker is very talented. Garrett Williams is very talented. There's talented players, but the things that make this team different and then have taken them to the next step this year is that they are playing about to the highest level as far as efforts this year, right? The effort they give on a snap-to-snap basis, even from the players that aren't as physically talented, this team will punch you in the mouth, man, and they'll keep coming every single snap. So hats off to Coach Babers in a tough situation coming into the year, and this coaching staff, he has instilled a toughness and a physicality into a team that in certain spots is not really that talented, right? Like they're not. And they've just played hard every single week. And I mean, even last week where they fall short to Clemson, like, I mean, they came out early in that game and they punched them in the mouth, right? Like they did, a team that's much more talented than them. So this is a team that's going to test you for 4 quarters. They're going to punch you. And when you punch them back, they're going to punch you again. Like this is one of those football teams. At the end of the day, Notre Dame has to be prepared both from a coaching perspective, from a player perspective, and they have to be willing to match blow for blow with this type of team, because this team is not going to go away, man. This is not a one punch and done type of fight. This team is going to keep coming back, keep crawling back, keep punching. This is that type of resilient team. So I don't know what the recipe was for the turnaround in the offseason, but whatever the Syracuse coaching staff did, they have exuded toughness into this program that I don't think was there the last couple of years.
There's no question. Mental toughness, physical toughness, all of it, Ryan. I mean, their offense last year had some physicality to it. They were a pretty good running team, but they couldn't throw the ball at all. And went out and made a great hire this offseason. Brennan Armstrong went looking like from a stud to mediocre. What was the big change? Offensive coaching and scheme. The guy that made him look like a stud last year is now the offensive coordinator, Robert Anai at Syracuse. Now, all of a sudden, Garrett Schrader last year couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, started 12 games, actually started 10 games, but played in all 12, passed for just over 1,400 yards last year, and was more of he was a runner. He was an old school quarterback. He was an old school running quarterback. Now he comes out this year, and all of a sudden the kid knows how to throw the football, and he looks like the top 300 player that he was coming out of high school. He's already, in 7 starts, has already surpassed his numbers last year in passing yards and touchdowns. And his passer rating has jumped up from 113.7 to 164.82, a perfect example of why a guy's production doesn't always equal he doesn't have talent. Sometimes guys have talent. They're not being coached or put in a good position, okay? Because this is the same football team as was last year. They didn't get a mess of transfers this offseason. The only transfer that I can think of that's really making much of a difference, like a big difference, is the safety that we talked about who transferred over from Rutgers.
Yep.
Most of the guys making an impact on this football team are dudes that were already here. They're just being coached up better now, being put in the same position. The really dynamic offense that Virginia had last year, everybody's back, and they stink. What's changed? Coaching. Yes. That's what's changed. And that's what I like about this football team. You know, their defensive coordinators now in year 3. They started showing this last year, Ryan. Look, they had 2 defensive players, Garrett Williams and Michael Jones, that were on Garrett Williams on both of ours. I had Michael Jones on my preseason all-opponent team, right? So Matthew Bergeron, the left tackle, was also on our preseason all-opponent team, and Sean Tucker was in that conversation. And if it wasn't for Travion Henderson at Ohio State, would have been on it, and he's out playing Travion Henderson this season.
Yep.
So this is a team that does have some talent, but top to bottom, it's just not the kind of roster that Notre Dame shouldn't be able to beat. Now, again, whether they will or won't, that's a whole different conversation. So back to Syracuse, Ryan. Let's talk about just kind of – we're going to intro them a little bit. First of all, Syracuse is 6-1, as everybody knows. They're ranked 16th in the country. They started their season with 6 straight wins, beat Louisville at home 31-7, had their first true road game of the season against UConn, won 48-14. Then had 4 straight home wins. They beat Purdue 32-29 in a game that I believe was like 9-6 going into the fourth quarter. Ended up being 32-29. Great back and forth fourth quarter game there between those 2 teams. Then they won an ugly game against Virginia 22-20. I believe Virginia missed a field goal late in that game with a chance to win it, I believe. Or maybe Syracuse hit a field goal late. I can't remember which way that direction went. Then you go next to Wagner, who was maybe 59-0. We'll talk a little bit about Wagner again. Played NC State at home, who they beat 24-9. Now, the asterisk there is NC State is a completely different football team without Devin Leary. They didn't have Devin Leary in that game, but they still scored 24 points on what has been a pretty game NC State defense this season. And then, of course, last week jumped up. Was it 21-10 at one point in time against Clemson? Couldn't put them away, missed some opportunities on short fields after turnovers to really put Clemson away. Couldn't do it. And Clemson battled back and came back and won that game. So they're 6-1. Their only loss being a road loss by 6 points to the number 5 team in the country. So this is a quality football team. But I've had some friends say, "Wow, they're winning with smoke and mirrors." I'm like, I don't really think so. Like, they've earned their wins. They weren't fluky wins. You know, they had to make some plays in those wins to come out on top. So I think they're a quality football team. Let's take a look, Ryan, at where they stand statistically. So this is sort of a first glance look at Syracuse. You'll see their ranks here. Offensively, they're a middle of the road ACC team for the most part, which again, ACC is an offensive oriented conference for the most part. So 5th in points per game, 9th in yards per game, 3rd in yards per play. That's a very interesting number right there, Ryan. You don't often see that kind of gap in yards. 6th in rushing yards, 5th in yards per rush, 7th in passing yards, but they're 3rd in passing yards per attempt and 3rd in passer rating because they don't throw it a ton. They don't run a lot of plays on offense. That's the thing, and I mean, Ryan, if you have some ideas as to why, I think part of it is they kind of play a bit of a ball control type of look. They're not a team that really pushes the tempo. I think that's part of it as well. I think that you look at their 3rd down offense is middle of the road, 6th in the conference. Their red zone touchdown rate on offense is 5th in the conference, and they're 4th in the conference in fewest turnovers. So solid offense, but nothing that knocks your socks off because that's not how Clemson's won this year, right? I mean, Syracuse has won. Again, they beat Purdue by scoring 32 points, but they had 9 points going into the 4th quarter. They beat Virginia and only scored 22 points, only scored 24 points in a win over NC State. The only game where they've scored over 31 points in a win was against a really bad UConn team and an FCS team. That's it. So they're not a high-octane offense. Their 33.9 points per game is also misleading in that they scored 59 points against Wagner. So that's gonna kind of take away from it. I mean, if you just look at it from you take Wagner out, they drop down to 29.7, which still ranks them 5th in the conference. If you look at it only against what teams have done against FCS opponents or FBS opponents, but that certainly plays a role in who they are. It's this number of it's over here, Ryan, though, is what makes this football team. But before I move on, you want to say something about the offense? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Brian, I mean, that's the only thing I could really come up with is that this team is just a run-oriented kind of ball control type of team. Because, I mean, when you look at the stats here on both sides of the football, I mean, they're not giving up a ton of yards, but they're not really, they're not piling up yardage either, despite having a pretty good yards per play average, to your point, right? So I think that we're looking at a team that knows their identity. They have a pretty good offensive line. They have a really good running back, and they have a quarterback that is kind of a dual threat kid that can also hurt you with his legs as well. So I guess that's the only reason I can really come up with, man, is that that's their style, and I think that they're true to that, which very different though than what, I mean, to your point though earlier, I mean, I was at the 2018 game with Syracuse when they played against Notre Dame, and that was a very high octane, like we're going to throw the ball around the yard type of look, right? Like that's what Coach Babers had typically done during his course of his career as an offensive play caller. And then this year, I know he's not calling plays, but just a very different fundamental team offensively than what we've seen in the past with Coach Babers, which is kind of interesting just to kind of look at.
Ryan, defensively, I think that's been a really interesting part of this football team for me. Look, here's the thing. So again, I'm about proper context, and I think that I don't like looking at FCS teams, and their ranking of 15.1 is in their yards per game averages are aided by the fact that they played Wagner. What was it, 50 yards? I think they held Wagner to 50 total yards of offense, if I remember correctly, in that game. I'm going to just look it up here real quick.
That's gross, man.
Yeah, they held Wagner to 31 rushing yards and 19 passing yards. That was their total. They had 38 plays for 50 yards. So you take that out because Wagner's not only an FCS team, they're a really bad FCS team. And so didn't really like that they played that. But if you only look at what they've done against FBS opponents, Ryan, they still rank 1st in the conference in scoring defense. If you just look at FBS teams, and they're 2nd in the conference in yards per game behind only Clemson, and they're only 7.1 or 9.1 yards behind Clemson against FBS only opponents. So you can look at the stats that way, and then yards per play, it's the same thing, Ryan. They are 3rd in the conference at 5.1. Clemson leads the conference at 4.9, and Virginia's also at 4.9. Clemson's at 4.88. Virginia's at 4.92. And then Syracuse is right there at number 3 at 5.06, tied with Florida State actually for 3rd. So still good, but not quite as good when you take out the Wagner game. So, they're about 330 plus, 335 yards per game on total offense. They're at 5.1 yards per play against FBS only teams. And, so you start to look at those numbers and you look at the context. Again, still good. Don't get me wrong, still good. But it's not quite as dominant when you look at what they've done against people not named Wagner. So like rushing yards, they go from 4th to 6th in the conference if you look at rushing yards against FBS only opponents. Same thing is true if you look at their pass defense against FBS only opponents right now. I believe when you look at their right now pass yards, they're first. They would drop down to second in passing yards. Now, again, only 4.5 behind Syracuse. But again, it's they're second in yards per attempt in that situation, and they're third in rating. So some categories where they're first, second, they drop down a spot or two. Quarterback rating, they stay the same. The point is, yes, it alters the numbers a little bit, but it doesn't change the story. Because the story is they're still a really good ACC. I mean, to me, the second best defense in the ACC. And I'll say this, they're not as good as Clemson because they're not as dominant up front. But I will say this, they're the most balanced defense in the ACC because they're good at all three spots. Clemson's just elite on the defensive line, and Syracuse isn't elite anywhere, right? They're just pretty good at a lot of different places. I would say they're the most balanced front to back, all three levels defense in the ACC. Ryan, do you agree or disagree with that thought?
No, I agree with it because I think what Syracuse has is they have a couple versatile, good players on the second level. They have a couple really good players in the secondary, and as a whole, that secondary has just been good overall. And then up front, you have kind of what we led off with, right? Like they have these kids that might not be as talented as some of their other back seven are, but it's from a individual to individual case, but play really hard, man. And they play a lot bigger than their size, and they're able to hold up despite not being the biggest defensive line that you are going to see in the ACC or just across FBS. I mean, there's some FCS teams that have bigger defensive lines than Syracuse does, if we're being completely honest, but it is something where they play incredibly hard up front. They have a couple really nice players on the second level that are really good college football players. And the secondary, they have probably 2 to 3 guys that are probably going to play NFL football down the line, right? So when you're talking about front to back, Brian, I agree completely because in the worst spot, technically, right, up front, Syracuse still has guys that make plays, man, and do their job. And that is something that can't be quantified enough at times, right? Like this isn't a team that is really good in the secondary, pretty good on the second level, and then just bad in the front. Like they play up to the other 2 levels of their defense up front, and they do that based upon effort. So I agree with you. I think that there's a good mixture of talent in certain spots, but also a lot of effort in others. And I think that they play up to a standard, which is what you've been seeing this year.
There's also been a level of consistency with his defense this year, Ryan. I mean, if you take away the Wagner game, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a single game where I'm like, wow, that was dominant. Like they just completely overwhelmed that team, like we've seen from some Notre Dame teams. I mean, they've given up 6.2, 4.4, 6.3, 4.3, 3.7, and 5.3 yards per game or yards per play against opponents this season. And that's good, right? That's definitely good. And anytime you're holding a team under 5 yards per play, you're doing a nice job. But then you look at it and you're like, like look like Notre Dame last year, and you look at some of the games they had, it's very similar to me, they're very similar to the way Notre Dame was down the stretch last year, where Notre Dame never had any like, wow, just light you up type of performances, but they were just really steadily good week after week after week on defense. And that's what I like about this team is they're not, their overall stats are not like padded by any, like, because that's why I want to take out the Wagner game, because I think that's always sort of the thing that people can look at and say, well, they played this team and they beat them 59-0, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I wanted to take out the Wagner game and give their stats in context to not having the Wagner game in it, which is still pretty good. Like first in points, second in yards, I think third in yards per play. Those are all still really good numbers, right? But the thing I like about it, Ryan, is there's no other game against an FBS team where they just played lights out, held that team to 205 yards, and that padded their stats. There isn't that type of performance from this team. Like kind of like where, Notre Dame last year, had that 4-game stretch, in where they were more, I said there was a consistency where there were no lights out performances, but during that stretch, Notre Dame held opponents to 184, 278, 224, and 227 yards of total offense. And Syracuse hasn't really had, like a lot of – actually, I was looking at they've had some games like that, but against kind of bad teams. But there's been no game where they held some team to like 150 yards, some bad team to like 150 yards. And so when I look at it, I think it's that level of consistency that I really like from this team. If you look at Syracuse's defense, they gave up 485 yards to Purdue and 450 to Clemson. A lot of those yards for Purdue came in the fourth quarter. Second half, but especially the fourth quarter. Clemson had a lot of plays late. So they're vulnerable, but I think they have a level of consistency that I really like. And I think that's the thing that really works for this football team right now. So that's what you look at when – hold on a second. We got to make this little note here real quick. But that's what I kind of like about this football team is I like that level of consistency that they bring to the table. So that's kind of a first glance look at Syracuse. That gives you a simple taste at kind of what their schedule is and then what they kind of do statistically. And then next, what we're going to do next is we're going to kind of take a look and talk a little bit about the Syracuse offense and a little about the Syracuse defense. And we'll jump into some specifics of what you can expect to see from this football team. We're going to start with the defense. And Ryan will be back here in a minute, but we're going to start with the defenses because we're going to start with the side of the ball that I believe and that Ryan believes, I'm sure, is the best part of this football team. This is the side of the ball that, to me, has them successful, and that is the Syracuse defense. So just base structure, they list themselves as a 3-3-5 defense. They are in no way similar to what you would think of a 3-3-5. And we talked about this the other day. We'll refer to it again today. It is very rare that I have seen them this season against any quality opponent where they only have 3 guys on the line of scrimmage. So what they'll do is they'll take either their rover occasionally, but more often than not, one of 2 linebackers, and it's not always the same guy. Sometimes it's Marlowe Wax that'll do that. Other times it's Derek McDonald that'll do that. But one of their linebackers will come up off the edge and kind of give them a 4-down look. They don't often do it so some teams that are 3-3-5s around will still stick with their odd front and then just walk a guy down. They don't play a lot of pure odd front on defense. Part of it is because it's good coaching. They're small, and they're not a very big football team. So that's part of it as well. I mean, their nose tackle is 5'11" and 266 pounds. One of their starting defensive ends, I think he's bigger than this, but he's listed, Steve Linton, at 6'5", 219 pounds. Now, I think he's bigger than the 219 he's listed at, but it isn't by a whole lot. And then their other defensive end on their depth chart, starting defensive end, Caleb Ochechukwu, is 6'4", 268. He's their big guy. Their backup nose guard, Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, is 6'4", 267. The backup to Steve Linton, Jadius Greer, is 6'6", 233. And their backup defensive end to Okechukwu is 6'4", 247. They're not big. Their linebackers are 225, 224, and 239. So they're not a real big team, but you know what they do? They coach to that. They are not going to fire off and just stay vertical. They run a ton of line games. They're going to twist and stunt and fire and just move all over. They are more, to me, more of a 4-down. They're 3-down personnel that plays a lot of 4-down looks. That's what I think of they're a 4-down alignment out of 3-down personnel. That's what I think from a base structure standpoint that this Syracuse team is. They know they're small. They also know they're quick, and they coach to that. And I think they do as good of a job as any team in the country, in my opinion, at coaching to their personnel, Ryan. That's something I really like about the Syracuse defense.
If I didn't see the depth chart before I started watching film on Syracuse, I would have thought they were just a 4-2-5. That's what I would have thought, right? Like that's stylistically what they are. They have the 2 really nice inside linebackers. They have an outside. Well, they use two different linebackers to your point of playing on the ball a little bit, right? So they kind of rotate that a little bit. But regardless, I mean, they're always in two linebacker sets for the most part. They'll have the rover in the game at times. But, I mean, they are a 4 down. They're giving you 4 defensive linemen. And, I mean, it works, though. It really works because what they have, Brian, I mean, to your point is they're quick. They know it. But also, they have linebackers on the second level, either Garrett McDonald or Marlowe Wax, that kind of have those tweener traits, like they're both kind of guys that are physical edge setters and kind of twitchy dudes, can do some stuff off the ball, but can also pass rush at points too, and can kind of do those things that can shoot gaps. And so they have a very versatile front 7 of their defense. Like they know that they have, I guess I should call it front 6 of their defense because they're playing with a rover, but they have on the first and second level guys that are movement-based players, which shouldn't look odd to Notre Dame fans. I mean, Notre Dame has Howard Cross that is 6 foot, 270 pounds. So that's their version of Howard Cross, right? They understand that they are undersized. They understand that they are quick. They understand that they are versatile. Those are the things that really work well. I mean, Steve Litton's a guy that is a pass rusher first and foremost, but I saw him get dropped into space a little bit, right? Like they understand that they need to win off of versatility and making teams uncomfortable with movement. And they do that really well. And I think the key is the linebacker room. I think the linebacker room in their front 6, front 7, however you want to qualify it, they give them a lot of versatile ability to play a couple different fronts and give them multiple looks and give them multiple movement. Guys like Marlowe Wax, they're the keys to this defense, in my opinion, of how they want to play up front. And that's what they make their living off of, man. That's what their hat's on. They are a versatile front that is going to give guys multiple looks. But to your point, Brian, you're talking about a 4-man front more often than not. It's just who is going to be the 4th man down. That's something that you're not always sure about.
We're going to show some clips here from Purdue and Clemson just to kind of give you a sense. The reason I picked these two teams because I think formationally they're a lot more similar at times to Notre Dame. Purdue will do some things that Notre Dame doesn't do, but they also do a lot of 12 personnel. Well, not a lot, but they'll do 12 personnel. They'll do a lot of 11. And so I just wanted to kind of show some base looks. Now, look, Syracuse is going to line up in a lot of different ways at times, but there is sort of a base structure out of which they kind of align, and you see that right here. So you can see their 3 down front. It's clearly not an odd look in this certain circumstance. On this particular play, it's Devin McDonald, I believe, that's down in the. You see a linebacker list, and the funny thing is they'll put him to the strong side, Ryan, but they don't often. They'll sometimes put him to the strong side, and then the tackle is inside of the guard, and it's like, okay, that's interesting. But then they slant to it. They move to the strength at times, or they'll bring a linebacker down, or they'll fit with a safety in that instance. But you see the 2 inside linebackers, Michael Jones is to the strong side, Marlowe Wax is to the weak side in this alignment, weak side being away from the tight end. You see the rover out in space, 2 corners. They have a field safety and a boundary safety. That's what those two words mean. So that's a look against it. This is an 11 personnel 2x2 alignment. So you see a receiver down here, 2 receivers up here, and then the tight end, the Durham kid is right here, and then, of course, a running back. Then you also are going to see them. This is against Clemson. This is out of a 3x1 set. So actually missed a guy there, Ryan. There should be that's actually the rover. That's the linebacker here. So I missed that guy when I was putting this graph together. So this is, again, it's the same look, very similar look, even against a 3x1 alignment out of 11 personnel. So 2x2, 3x1, 11 personnel, you see the same base look. They'll do a lot of cover 2 to the boundary and a lot of cover 4 to the field. They like to bracket the boundary guy, which is what will make a lot of conversation, kind of about how you can utilize that this week. Here's another look here. This is out of 12 personnel against Clemson. Similar alignment. Now, Clemson, did you see the times when Purdue – I said Clemson, I meant Purdue. Did you see the couple times Purdue went 12 personnel sort of with like a 6th offensive lineman? It was very strange. Yeah. I didn't love that. But this is a 12 personnel out of true 12 personnel. And you can see the alignment doesn't change, right? Still 4-2-5, the 4-2-5 look out of 3-3-5 personnel. Mike linebacker. Now, this is one that Ryan was talking about. This is actually now Marlowe Wax right here, who's normally off the ball in the previous 2 looks. So in the previous 2 looks, This is Marlowe Wax. I think Marlowe Wax is right there, Ryan, I believe.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
in this particular play, he is right here. Okay. In this third look, he is now down on the line, and Derek McDonald is off the ball. And Michael Jones is now the mic. So they'll do some different things there. To Ryan's point, here the linebacker is on the weak side of the alignment, technically, because it's technically sort of an H-back look. They're not calling strength to the boundary or strength to the tight end that's attached. They're treating strength to the 3-by-1 in this particular alignment. And that will kind of determine it. Now, on the back end, their safeties will do a lot of different things. They'll line up. Sometimes they'll have a cornerback here, and then the safety will be here. So they'll do some different things. But structurally, Ryan, this is what you're going to see from Syracuse. It's not super, super complicated. They'll throw some different stuff at you. They'll do some different alignments. They'll bring safeties down to fit off the linebackers, things like that. They don't do a ton from a structural standpoint that's really different. What they do is they do a lot of post-snap movement. Now, it's not a lot of variety of post-snap movement. They don't run like 35 different stunts every game. It's a lot of ET twists, TE twists. It's a lot of slants with linebackers crashing. It's just they know we're small, but we're quick. Like their little nose guard, I was kind of joking with you before. I was like, this kid is just killing Purdue. I mean, just beating Purdue center leverage-wise the whole game. I mean, it's going to be a battle for Zeke Correll. He's going to have to play really well this game. The kid's not real talented. He's just short, quick, and he knows how to use his lack of height to his advantage. And that's the thing, is they are going to try to beat you off the ball all game long. And they coach to that. And so and the other thing, they trust their secondary immensely. They put their corners on a lot of islands. They'll put their safeties on a lot of islands. I would say their base coverage is 24, Ryan, 2 to the boundary, 4 to the fields, their base coverage. But they'll play cover 1, they'll play some cover 3, they'll play some like robber type stuff. They'll mix it up a little bit, but I think that's kind of their base structure. And they're going to ask their corners to play a lot of man coverage, and they're going to put their slot safety. So if we go back to this look right here, for example, there are a lot of ways as an offense you can get this guy matched up against this guy one-on-one. A lot of ways. But you know why they'll do that? Because this guy, these two safeties, especially him, where am I at? Especially him, pretty good cover players. And so, we've talked about how Stanford's safeties were really good run defenders. I think the Syracuse safeties are solid run defenders, but they're pretty good in coverage. And I think that's what makes them effective, is they trust their secondary to line up with you and play man. Now, in the fourth quarter, Garrett Williams got smoked twice by Charlie Jones. So I think that obviously played a big role in that too. I believe it was Charlie Jones, right? Isn't he 15? Isn't Charlie Jones 15 for Purdue?
Yes.
Yeah. He beat him twice. Beat him on a post route for a big play, and then beat him for a long touchdown up on a go route. But, for first 3 quarters, he was locking those guys down. So, Purdue passed for a lot of yards against Syracuse, 424. But I would argue over 100 of those, well over 100 of those yards came on 2 plays in the fourth quarter. So they can be beat, but Notre Dame hasn't had receivers show that they can play like Charlie Jones so far this season, Ryan. That's going to be the interesting thing. But there are a couple matchups that could be very interesting. But I love that they trust their secondary. If you're Notre Dame, you got to find a way to take advantage of that. But that's also what makes them difficult to defend, because they can put more resources into the box if they need to, Ryan, because they do trust their secondary. And that's where they can – that's one of the things that helps them be the movement. And the fact that they can insert numbers are the 2 things that I think have made their run defense pretty good this year. Now, it's been pretty good against teams that aren't really good at running the football. We saw what Clemson was able to do to them last week, who's not even a great running team, but a better running team. So they're vulnerable there, but they have ways built into what they do to protect themselves a little bit if they need to.
Well, and you have 4 quality players in the secondary. I mean, first and foremost, right? Like you mentioned Garrett Williams. Garrett Williams is going to be a draft pick next year. Talk about Deuce Chestnut, who's only a sophomore, the other corner. He's a good football player, man. He's a New Jersey kid originally. Elijah Clark is a transfer from Rutgers, who's a good quality football player. And then Jihad Carter, the free safety that you highlighted there, kid's got a little bit of range on the back end, which is pretty nice to kind of watch, right? So you have 4 quality members of that secondary. And I think the best part of it, Brian, is I think that actually, as a whole, they play better than maybe what they even are individually. You know, like I think that Garrett Williams is a really good player when he's on and healthy. But as a whole, the secondary just really trusts each other, I think. You know, like they look like they really kind of play off of each other well, which is why they're able to do so much up front, to your point, right? Because the one thing they've adopted this new style of like, hey, we're not going to get beat deep. We're not going to let up explosives. We're not. We're going to let you kind of pick the, you know, we're going to give you the flats occasionally because they are a heavy 2-4 cover, you know, two man type of team. Like that's what this team wants to do. And in that situation, you're going to give up some of the flat stuff. But the one thing that I love about Garrett Williams, especially, and Chestnut does this well, is that they'll come up and they'll tackle, man, and they'll rally to the football. They'll give up some yardage, but they're not going to give up the explosive. So this is a game where Notre Dame has to force them, secondary-wise, to be uncomfortable. Because like you said, there is matchups that Notre Dame can create, and there's not going to be a lot of opportunities, I think, to create explosive plays in a vacuum. But what Notre Dame has to do in this game is to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves and then force this secondary to be uncomfortable. If you just let Garrett Williams sit back there and cover 2 or cover 4 all day, that's it, man. Like, no one's going to get on top of him, and he's just going to protect himself, you know, and he's a good football player. But making him uncomfortable, making the safeties uncomfortable, getting them into positions that they don't want to be in, that's the key for Tommy Rees in this offense this week. Is you have to scheme some stuff up where you make the secondary members uncomfortable. Because if they're just sitting back and they're 2-4, 2-man, whatever they want to play, cover 3, they're just going to be sitting back there and just waiting for an offense to make a mistake. You have to be advantageous against the secondary, which is what makes them so good, in my opinion.
Let's go to the other side of the ball, Ryan. Talk a little bit about the Syracuse offense.
Mm-hmm.
Big offensive line. That's the first thing that stands out is a big offensive line. Their center, not a real big kid. He's sitting there at 6'4", 292 pounds. That's Carlos Vettorello. Left to right, left tackle to right tackle. Everybody else, Matt Bergeron is 6'5", 322. Kalen Ellis is 6'6", 375. Chris Bleich is 6'6", 326. And Dakota Davis is 6'5", 335. They're big. They're a big defensive line. Now, the thing about it is they're not a super mobile offense. I said defensive line. I meant offensive line. They're not a big – they're very big. They have some power, not kind of what you would see from like a Bama line, you know, that's got that same kind of size, or a Georgia line, but they've got some power and they know how to throw their weight around. But the thing that's hurt them at times this year, Ryan, is they're not super mobile, especially at the guard spots, in my opinion. Like they're big and physical, but they're not super mobile. And they have had some issues kind of, I think, at times, teams that attack them, either shooting gaps or blitzing linebackers, teams that have some quickness can give them some problems. And so I think that's something that to me has – I wouldn't say it hasn't killed their run game because their run game is good. But let's be honest. I think you and I – well, I don't have to be honest because we could agree to disagree on it. But to me – their run game hasn't been nearly as effective this year as it was last year. I mean, last year they averaged 213.5 yards per game and 5.2 yards per carry. This year they're averaging 179.3 yards per game and only 4.8 yards per carry. And so and again, part of that is benefited from the fact that they averaged 9.95 yards per carry and 388 yards against Wagner. In their other 6 games, they went for 208 and for 5.2 a carry against Louisville. They only went for 156 and 3.1 per carry against UConn. They went for 125 yards and 3.6 per carry against Purdue. They went for 75 yards and only 1.97 to be specific against Virginia. Good game against NC State, 179 for 5.97, so 6 yards per carry. But then they only went for 124 for 4.4 yards per carry against Clemson. Now, Marcus Freeman brought this up yesterday. I got to know why Sean Tucker didn't play on Saturday. And I don't think they've said anything about it yet. My guess would be he got banged up. There's no way they went into that game and said, hey, we're only going to give Sean Tucker 5 carries, especially since he averaged over 10 yards a carry in that game. So, he had a 23-yard run early in the game, and after that, he didn't touch the ball. Garrett Schrader was their entire running game the rest of the way. Now, I don't know if that was protecting Tucker, if it was bad play calling, if it was bad decision-making by Tucker. I don't know why, But that was one of the head-scratching moves from this game, in my opinion. But it just kind of speaks to the fact that they have not really been a great rushing team like they were last year, Ryan. You take away the Wagner game, and to be honest with you, they've been pretty mediocre. They had a 38-yard run against NC State, and you had I think Tucker had like 2 really nice runs, and outside of that, they were just kind of good running the ball against NC State. Whereas last year, you look at some of their games last year, Ryan, they went 283 against Ohio, 286 against Albany, 228 against Liberty, 239 against Florida State, 354 against Wake Forest, 165 for 5.5 against Clemson, 314 against Virginia Tech, and 293 against Boston College. That's not this team. Now, the counter, they've been way better throwing the ball this year. Now, they're not an elite throwing team. They're not like they were with Eric Dungey. I mean, talk about winning different. In 2018, Syracuse rushed for, let's do the numbers. Syracuse rushed for 200 yards that year. Big part of that was Eric Dungey, as we talked about. He had 15 rushing touchdowns that year. They were a team that threw for 264 yards that year, and they were throwing for even more prior to Dungey getting hurt. So against Notre Dame, I mean, he had 10 passing yards against Notre Dame. And then there was a couple other blowout games where he got knocked out and Tommy DeVito came in and they didn't throw for as much. But they were a really good throwing team that year, really balanced, get the ball outside, kind of an air raid type of team. That's his background. He came up in the Art Briles tree, coach at Eastern Illinois. They were throwing it with Jimmy Garoppolo, Bowling Green, same kind of deal. They're a different team now. Even the quarterback runs aren't used as dominantly this year, but they're a much more efficient passing team this year. But I think Clemson showed something. If you can force them to pass, where they're passing because they have to, not because they want to, they're much easier to defend. And that's what happened in the second half of last week's game, in my opinion. They forced Garrett Schrader to beat them with his arm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Brian, even structurally, they're different running the football than they were last year. Like last year, if you watch Syracuse, they were a lot of outside and inside zone. Like they ran a lot of outside zone last year, and then they were running the zone read game off of the inside work with Garrett Schrader a ton. This team is much more inside dictated type of run team because I think that they've had to adjust to the fact, to your point, a couple of their new starters, mainly inside, are not the fleetest of foot athletically, right? Like I would say, just based upon everything I've seen from the offensive line, I've watched a few of their games already this year. I think outside of Matt Bergeron, I don't think there's an offensive lineman that I would say is a plus athlete on the offensive line. Like Matthew Bergeron is the athlete on the offensive line, which is why he plays left tackle, right? But, I mean, the Ellis kid that stands next to him, I mean, he's 375 pounds, and he's a legit 375 pounds, like he's not moving laterally or to the second level a ton. Like that kid wants to work at the point of attack. That's where his bread is buttered. And I think that all across the offensive line, they've had structurally a different approach this year out of necessity. Like I don't think it was structural because they felt like, hey, we could be a better inside running team this year than we were last year, and that's how we're going to kind of work the emphasis of our offense. They had to kind of make this switch because they don't have a lot of great athletes up at the offensive line level. So you have seen a setback in that regard. But I mean, on a game-to-game basis, Brian, like this is a team where if you have a Sean Tucker that is healthy, you have a Garrett Schrader that is humming in all cylinders, this team can still hurt you. Like they can still hurt you in the run game. There's no doubt about it. But to your point, and I agree with it 100%, they are not nearly as, I think last year especially, they created a lot more big plays than what they're creating this year. Like there was a lot of, I feel like every week Sean Tucker was breaking off a 70-yarder. Like that's just what it felt like last year. This year it hasn't quite been the same deal. Still a good running team, but not nearly as lethal as last year. I think that Notre Dame has a chance to have a interesting matchup because I think they are a lot quicker up front. They have a lot more athleticism than what Syracuse's offensive line is going to bring. And it's going to be interesting because if you can stop that run game and make this a one-dimensional football team, I mean, yeah, Garrett Schrader has taken a step forward as a passer, but at the end of the day, I'd rather force Syracuse to pass than just let them have their way running the football. Like that's where that's where the emphasis needs to be for Notre Dame. So we'll see, but it is definitely a different Syracuse team than what we saw in 2021. There's no doubt about that.
It's a Syracuse team that you want to force them to pass and contain the quarterback run. Keep Garrett Schrader in the pocket. I don't think is capable of beating you if he can only play from the pocket. I don't. We saw him have some nice balls in the first half against Clemson. He played with a pretty clean pocket. But even then, I mean, a lot of their points I felt in that game were built around, short fields and mistakes by Clemson. I mean, look, Clemson tried it. I felt like, man, it's like, is Clemson trying to give them this game? Like, I felt like Clemson was doing everything they could to let Syracuse win that game, and Syracuse wasn't obliging in that contest, Ryan. But I mean, you look at Syracuse. They had a couple good, lengthy drives in the first half. But one of their scores was on a 90-yard fumble return for a touchdown, right? They had two good drives in that game, but other than that, I mean, they didn't really take advantage, in my opinion, of good field position. And it's kind of, it was like, at least last week Notre Dame was getting points. In those drives, they were at least they were getting points. I mean, you look at the second half, and Clemson fumbles the ball, and Syracuse recovers it. Syracuse starts their drive at their own 20-yard line after a Clemson fumble. Clemson throws a pick, and Syracuse starts at midfield. They go 3 and out. It's just like you had some missed opportunities in that game where you really could have done some stuff with the ball, and you just weren't able to take advantage of it. And so those are the things that you look at and say, boy, those are some big missed opportunities that you had to move the ball and get some points. And they couldn't grind out the tough yards against Clemson either. Turned it over on downs on their first drive of the game. Now, again, that was against a really good Clemson front seven.
Yes.
Will Notre Dame's front seven be able to play to that ability? That's the question. But I find it interesting that a run game that's just built on sticking between the tackles isn't as good as it should be. I mean, it sounds like we've kind of talked about that with Notre Dame, right? Where if you lack diversity in the run game, it's going to be harder to create space and to create those big plays. And Syracuse can grind out yards. They're just not ripping off the big runs that they used to. I mean, Notre Dame fans have seen Sean Tucker. He ripped off an 80-yard touchdown run against Notre Dame in 2020.
Okay. I remember him. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Of course, Chris Tyree countered back with a 94-yard touchdown in that game.
Sure.
And Clemson has continued to give him the ball more and use him in better ways where Notre Dame has not. But Sean Tucker's still having a very good season. It's just not – it's just a different kind of season than it was last year, Ryan. So it makes it interesting. On the outside, good weapons on the outside. They have Aronde Gadsden. The second he doesn't go by Aronde Gadsden Jr. He goes by Aronde Gadsden the second. They listed him as a tight end on the depth chart. And he's listed as a receiver on the roster, and they use him like a slot receiver. But I don't know why they list him as a tight end. He's not lining up and kicking out 9 techniques, right? I mean, that's just not.
He's 216 pounds. He's not. Yeah, he's not.
Right. Exactly. But they have some good players. They have 2 big kids: Gadsden 6'5", 216, Damian Alford 6'11" or 6'6", 6'11", 6'6", 211. So they have some weapons there, Ryan, at receiver, and then they have some shorter guys that are good players and can move around. But Gadsden's by far their top weapon. He has 37 catches. The next closest guy in catches is Sean Tucker at 28. He has 593 yards. The next closest guy is Devon Cooper at 234. Damian Alford, who's 6'6", 211, he has 6 catches on the year, right? Courtney Jackson's their other starting receiver. He has 12 catches for 168 yards. Then Devon Cooper is their other listed wide receiver, has 18 catches for 234 yards. The bulk of their touches go to their running back and their quote unquote tight end, I should say. I say that jokingly to Aronde Gadsden, who
I think they're just trying to. Right? I think they're just trying to get him some All-American love, Brian. Let's list him as a tight end so the numbers can dictate that.
I guess if they're going to do that, fine. You might want to consider, I don't know, putting him as a tight end on your roster also. But here's the point. Here's the point, Ryan. They have a combined 65 catches on the season, Aronde Gadsden and Sean Tucker, running back. That is 51.2% of the team's total catches on the season. Those 2 players have that. Now, and it's the same story if you look at the yards. Those 2 players combined have 811 yards, which is a little under 50% of the team's total yards. So it's 49.7% of the team's total yards. So those 2 players account for half of their catches and half of their yards. And so it's one of those things where if you're Notre Dame and you don't have a game plan that says, hey, we're going to not let Aronde Gadsden beat us, then, I'm not really sure what you're doing there. Now, saying that and then achieving that are 2 different things, because I thought, Clemson tried to do that a little bit and he went 6 for 86, right? I mean, he's made plays every game, but you now have a much bigger book on him now than you did before. The kid only caught 2 passes last year, so he kind of came into this year as a bit of an anomaly. You didn't really know what to expect, and he's still rolling 7 games in, but Notre Dame's going to have a way to try to slow him down. That's just going to have to be the key in this game.
And that's what I'm most looking forward to, Brian. If there was like a player versus player matchup or player formula for success that I would like to see, I am curious on what they do against Gadsden. Because like you said, I mean, he spends a lot of time in the slot, right? It's a bigger slot. He's 6'5", 216 pounds. I mean, you're not just going to throw Tariq Bracy on him at 5'10", 185 pounds, right? Like, that's not going to be the recipe for success. So is your answer a big nickel? Is your answer more Jack Kaiser if he is available and healthy? I know he's dealing with a little bit of a thigh bruise or whatever it is. So what's the formula for defending an Oronde Gadsden? That I don't know the answer to that. That's just something that I will be keeping my eyes close on Saturday to say, like, what's their plan? It's any team that plays Notre Dame right now, they have a Michael Mayer plan, right? Like, that's the plan. That's how you stop Michael Mayer. What's the Oronde Gadsden plan? Like, there's got to be a plan in the passing game to how you counteract this type of size, because it's 6'5", 216. He's a matchup against almost every defensive back that you'll find across the country, like just from a size perspective, from a length perspective, from a reach perspective. Like, all those things he has an advantage at, right? And then the question is, after that is, Sean Tucker in the passing game scares me. I'll be very honest with you. He scares me a little bit, man, because they'll check it down a little bit. They'll throw some screens. They'll motion him and just throw him a little bit, some swing routes out in space. Your second level, your defense needs to be good. They need to come up and they need to play well, from the rover to the linebackers in pursuits. So those teams, I'm interested to see, though, especially
his 28 catches, Ryan, are not just 28 checkdowns.
No,
it's not. They're use him in the pass game. He is a weapon in the pass game. He's not just catching a bunch of swings and checkdowns when nobody else is open. They will design. They use him in some different ways. They'll try to scheme him up to get him free. To your point, somebody said, Ronald Tuck, how are you guys talking about Syracuse offense? Notre Dame isn't any better. We're no juggernaut, dude. It's a show previewing Syracuse. It's nothing to do with Notre Dame's offense. Okay, I've been saying that all year. Calm down.
No,
okay.
Notre Dame is also not a juggernaut, Ronald. Is that what you want to hear?
We never claim they are. I mean, what are you talking about, man? Like, calm down, right? This is a preview of Syracuse. Just like we do every single week, we look at their offense and just break it down for you so you can be educated on what Notre Dame is going to face on Saturday. But anyway, Ryan, I think the thing I like about this is that they're an efficient offense, but here's the interesting nugget. Marcus Freeman has seen this offense before. They saw this last year against Virginia. Robert and I's offense. He's seen the run structure. He has seen them use big, tall weapons from the slot a lot. And I thought Notre Dame had a really good game plan against them last year. Now, it helped that Brennan Armstrong didn't play. But even then, I thought Notre Dame in that game had a very good game plan to limit. Now, Virginia had a couple big plays here and there. But overall, I thought they did a really good job schematically of not – like, some teams I thought panicked trying to defend the big guys and, Wicks on the outside. And I thought Notre Dame had a really nice plan. They didn't panic. They didn't overdo it. They mixed up their coverages. And I thought they did a pretty good job of covering guys up, even because you can look and say, well, even if Brennan Armstrong was quarterback, there still wasn't anybody open a lot. It would have impacted it, but not impacted it where they would have gone from 3 to 30 in that particular game. And a big part of it was they shut down the Virginia run game and they pressured the quarterback. And that's going to be a key in this one as well, which we'll get into later in the week. So going to be a very interesting matchup. Huge opportunity for Notre Dame in this game. A win, and Notre Dame all of a sudden starts talking about, like, okay, big one behind us, gain some confidence, and then you go back home and hopefully you can kind of build on that as you move forward. So big opportunity. 16th ranked Syracuse, 6-1 coming in to this game, and it's Notre Dame's first game at the Carrier Dome since, I think, 2004, right?
Wow.
I think it was Justin Tuck's last game at Notre Dame, I believe, was in the Carrier Dome, but they finished one of Ty Willingham's seasons at the Carrier Dome. And I believe it was 2004, but it could have been 2003. Now that I think about it, you know how I am, Ryan. When I kind of think about something, I was like, okay, now I got to look it up. Now I got to remember which season it was. It was 2003, it looks like. So it's 2003. Their last game of the year was at Syracuse, a 38-12 loss. It's not Justin Tuck's last game, so he came back that next season. But that was the capper of a 5-7 season. And then, of course, we have a series history article on the front page of the site. And let me look up the Notre Dame this is the 11th meeting. Notre Dame has a 7-3 advantage. They beat Syracuse in 1914 and 1961, a game that the great Ernie Davis was the starting running back for Syracuse. Mm-hmm. Syracuse then beat Notre Dame in 1963. They didn't play again for 40 years, and then they played in 2003, a game that Syracuse won to make it 2-2. Then Notre Dame beat them on the last home game of the 2005 season with Brady Quinn. In 2005, Syracuse beat Notre Dame again in 2008, 24-23. If you remember that game, that was the game where fans were throwing snowballs at the Notre Dame players. That was Manti Te'o's official visit. Brutally bad loss. Greg Robinson was the coach. He'd already been fired, and they still lost that game. And then they've played them 4 times in the last decade. They beat them in 2014. That was the game where Everett Golson set a Notre Dame record for consecutive completed passes. He put on an RPO clinic in that game against Syracuse that year. Should have been a much bigger blowout, but had some bad turnovers. Won 50-33 in 2016. That game was 33-27 at halftime. Do you remember that game? It was like I think it was like 16-13, and there was still like 10 minutes left in the first quarter because Notre Dame scored a touchdown. Syracuse went down, scored a touchdown. Notre Dame blocked the PAT. Cole Luke ran it back. And I'm only remembering this because I was watching a little bit of it last night. I vaguely remember it, but not to the degree that I'm recalling it now. And then Notre Dame scored again to make it 16-13 or 16-6. Syracuse went down and scored to make it 16-13. And then CJ Sanders, I do remember this, returned the next kickoff back for a touchdown. It was 23-13, and there was still 10 minutes left in the first quarter. It was an insane game. It was the first game after the Van Gorder era. They had just fired Van Gorder the week before. Promoted Greg Hudson to defensive coordinator, even though Mike Elson was actually the one calling plays. Deshaun Kaiser, I think, first play of the game, hit Equanimous St. Brown over the middle, and he ran for a long touchdown. Very, very entertaining game. Notre Dame dominated the game in 2018 at Yankee Stadium, and then, of course, in 2020, Notre Dame in a very sloppy game beat Syracuse 45-21 which was the last game of the home season for Notre Dame that season. So, first trip to the Carrier Dome since 2003 for Notre Dame against Syracuse. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. We've already got a dozen questions and comments already starred. If you have some more questions, we're going to work through the list of comments and questions now. But if you have some stuff that you want us to talk about, please feel free to reach out and put your questions in there now. If you left a question really early, if you definitely want us to talk about it, wouldn't hurt to put it in now. And then we'll get to it again. So we'll get to that next. But before we get to the mailbag, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. So, Ryan, let's dive into the mailbag. Today's mailbag is going to be interesting. We have some comments and some questions. We're going to start off with Jim Halloran, who left us with a super chat. We always try to go to those first. Thank you, Jim. It was Brian and Ryan. Does the team rep audibles against different looks? If so, why do you need to scan? They don't really do audibles on offense. I think Ryan is what he's referring to. They don't really do checks on offense. It's more of a check with me thing. And right. To a degree, I'm okay with that. Like, I don't know if I want Drew Pine necessarily doing a lot of audibles. There's a difference between an audible and a lining up in a 2x2 and calling your run strength. That's not necessarily an audible. You may call stretch to the right, but you have certain keys that if you see this, you're just check stretch to the left, that kind of thing. I don't count that as an audible. That's a check. But I don't know if I want Drew Pine in a situation right now where he's audibling a lot. My thing is, I don't feel you need to do the scan every single play, right? Sometimes just run the freaking play. You know what I mean? Just run it. Almost cussed there. I heard that. I got caught between two. I didn't say it. I got caught between two different words, and it sounded like I cussed, but I didn't. But just run the play, right? Just run the play. You're in a decent look. Just run the play. But it's that kind of thing. So no, I don't. They don't really rep audibles right now, nor should they. I don't think they should be doing a lot of audibles. I don't think that's something I want on Drew Pine's shoulders right now. Eventually, sure, but not right now.
Yeah.
Not right now.
Yeah.
And why do they need to scan, Ryan? Let's explain it. Break it down for them. Why do they need to scan? They don't need to scan. Why do they scan?
They scan because they want to get into the right play every play. That's
Perfect
why
play.
they want to scan. Perfect. Oh, the perfect play. Sorry,
Yes.
the perfect play call. And I mean, Brian. I mean, but we've talked about this, right? A ton. Right now, you have a bunch of players that I think are playing slow because they are thinking too much. So why would I also want Drew Pine to have to think more than he has to think at this point, right? Like, take some stuff off his plate, man. That's what your job's for, right? I mean, as the coach. But I mean, to your point though, and I will continue to. I mean, ban the scan, man. Ban it.
Yeah.
This is my thing. Sometimes players are going to surprise you. You're in like not the greatest look you wanted, but they'll still make a play because you know what? You're at Notre Dame. You have talents. Let the guys use their talent, man. Like they'll surprise you sometimes. They will. They'll surprise you.
Right. And just know that when you make those checks, you also give the defense a chance to get set up. So there you go. This question was answered in the chat, but I also want to bring it up now, just in case somebody else had the question. Because I actually asked this because I wear noise canceling headphones during the game because there's just too many people committing like assaults on their keyboard, and it just drives me nuts. But he says, who was the receiver wearing number 6 on Saturday? Didn't know we had one and can't find him on the depth charts. It's Deion Colsey. So Deion's been on some kick return teams, and on those Brandon Joseph is also on some of the kick return at times. There's been other special teams that Deion has been working on. He's as a 1 or a 2 that are with Brandon Joseph. You can have a guy, so if he's a number 2 on the punt block team, for example, and you have to put him in, you don't want to just change his number constantly, so just give him a new number. And so they did. And I was like, who's number 6? Because I was like, I thought it was Deion, but I didn't recognize the number. But yeah, it was Deion Colsey is who that was. Here's one for you, Ryan. We Are Not Marshall says their secondary is really good. Are the wide receivers talented enough to get space for plays? Can we just say this, Ryan? Talent has not been Notre Dame's issue this season. Still,
No,
not the issue.
No. I mean, you have to pick your spots with Syracuse secondary. I mean, in a vacuum, right? Notre Dame it's not like, oh my God, Garrett Williams is just like this premier athlete and premier talent, and then Lorenzo Styles is not athletic, right? Like the talent issue is not there, like the discrepancy anyway. Is Garrett Williams just a more confident football player than what Notre Dame's trying at a wide receiver right now? For sure. I mean, he plays in control and he knows his limitations. He knows his strengths, and those things matter. They do. But I mean, to the question, you can find space against this team. It is possible. Yes. It's one of those things where I think you really need to work through the safeties to get them really uncomfortable, because the corners are going to mostly be in the right spot, in my opinion. Movements based inside, motioning across, getting different looks out of the slot. Like I had some post-snap switch stuff. That would be a big opportunity, I think, in this game as well. Like those things. I want to make those safeties uncomfortable in this football game to create space.
I'm going to somewhat push back on that a little bit, Ryan. I actually do think their cornerbacks are vulnerable if you attack them correctly. If you're just going to attack them with a bunch of go routes with Braden Lindsay and Lorenzo Styles, you're probably not going to have success unless you somehow like use a flood concept that kind of gets them guessing. But they don't mess up on that a lot, especially Garrett Williams, who's to the field a lot. And so I don't think it's necessarily that. What you said is correct, but the stuff you're talking about is also things I want to see them use to attack the corners, especially if they're going to give them a man. If they can do things where Syracuse is going to stay in their 24 look all game, cool, right? Well, some people call it cover 6, right? Some people call that. I always called it 24-42 because then I could identify where it was. Some people call it number 6. My problem with calling it cover 6 is you can't always identify if it's field, boundary, whatever the case may be. But anyway, different conversation for a different day. But if they're playing that, then there's some things that I want to do to try to get my receivers, to your point, matched up against the safeties, over the middle, doing high lows, flooding the field, things like that. There's a lot of field flood opportunities out of different looks that you can use to exploit this football team. But if you are able to get them into some man stuff, especially if you're able to run the football, there's a lot of looks where if you can kind of do some stacks and things like that. The thing about Garrett Williams and Deuce Chestnut is they're really clean athletes and they're physical athletes, even though they're not huge. But neither of them, to me, are burners. That's a one knock I have on Garrett Williams. And that's why Charlie Jones is able to beat him. He just ran by him twice in the fourth quarter. He didn't get a real clean hit on him, and Charlie Jones just ran by him. So I think you can run by Garrett Williams if you're good enough at the line of scrimmage. And the reality is Notre Dame's receivers aren't good at the line of scrimmage. There's two ways to beat Garrett Williams: with size or get him moving. But then if they're in zone, you're not worried about him at all because he's covering somebody else. So I think the stuff you're talking about to create matchups on the safeties is perfect. I agree with it. But I also want to see some of that stuff being used to attack the corners. And that's my thing. Now, one thing that I would do, because with all the two they played at the boundary, there's some hole throw opportunities. But I don't know how much of that you really want to do. They're going to have to flood the boundary at times, right, to get the corner and the safety kind of going, and then maybe do some kind of trail, get their linebackers in space, because their linebackers can run, but they can get a little aggressive at times. But then also they drop them over the middle a lot more than they drop them necessarily under some of that stuff. So I think there's some opportunities there. There's some things where you can run some clear outs and bring crossers across. I think there's definitely some opportunities for that, where you kind of run them off and then bring somebody backside. That's where Notre Dame should be able to have some success on the football, is getting them in chase stuff, because that's where they can use their speed. If they're just going to use their speed to just vertically go against them, I think these two kids are both too fundamentally sound and too good at transitions, and they're bigger than the Notre Dame receivers. Garrett Williams is bigger than Braden Lindsey. Deuce Chestnut's bigger than Braden Lindsey. Lorenzo Styles is similar in size to them, but he doesn't play to his size. Garrett Williams is 6'1", 189. Deuce Chestnut 6'1", 198. They're both bigger than the Notre Dame receivers, especially the way that Lorenzo Styles is playing right now. He's not playing like a 6'1", 195-pound kid. He plays more like a 5'10", 180-pound kid right now. So I do think there's some opportunities there, but look, you're gonna have to get creative to beat them, right, Ryan? Like, Notre Dame has talent, but they're just not and the coaching isn't going to all of a sudden get better in a week to where they're going to look like Torrey Holt and Marvin Harrison coming off the line of scrimmage. So do some stuff schematically, and the group that I think can be really big in this game, the slots and the running backs. You've got to be smart about how you use your slots and your running backs. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was going to say the running backs, I think, is a big thing, too. Especially because for me, Michael Jones is a nice coverage player, but Marlowe Wax, like, if you get an opportunity to get a running back in a one-on-one opportunity against Marlowe, whether that's running an angle route or running an option route or a wheel route, whatever it is, I think you can take advantage of the linebackers not named Michael Jones in man-to-man coverage. Like, I think that you can do that, right? So yes, I think there's big opportunities. I also think there's big opportunities if you do run some of your 12 personnel stuff, where if you want to actually use a Mitchell Evans or a Holden Stays in the passing game, where if you get one of those matched up against a Marlowe Wax, then you could also take advantage there. So I think there is some opportunities to make mismatches. Middle of the field is more where I would want to go. But to your point, there's mismatches that you can create everywhere. But the safeties and linebackers, I think there are opportunities, especially in man coverage, to take advantage of.
Yeah. So that's a very good question. Very good question. Led to, I think, a good discussion. I like that. Appreciate that. Mr. Sanders says, game all depends on which Pine shows up, UNC or the Stanford Pine. Ryan, that's exactly what I said to you on the phone earlier. And it was more about Tommy Rees, because I think Drew Pine's issues have as much to do with Tommy Rees as they do about Drew Pine. But I said if they scheme, call, and play like they did against North Carolina on offense, they'll win this game and win it comfortably, in my opinion. Now, that's a big if, because we've seen that once. That game is the anomaly right now, right? It is the anomaly. So we don't know if this team is capable of doing that again, or if it was just kind of a one-off thing. We'll find out. But yes, if that version of Drew Pine, quick, decisive, spreading the ball around, confident, and guess what that Drew Pine had, Ryan? A lot of stuff to the slots, a lot of stuff to the backs.
Yep.
Right? Different defense, different structure, but similar philosophy.
If you have a confident quarterback to that degree that you saw in that football game, and the passing attack that you had in that game, the efficiency in there, I could argue that Notre Dame might run away with this one. Like, this one might not be close. Like, Notre Dame's – that's the maddening thing about Notre Dame right now, Brian, is that you've seen some moments where you're like, wow, that's really positive stuff, man. Like, you could probably play with anyone in the country. And you've seen other times where they play down to the level of competition. So it's sometimes the volatility. Yes.
Below the level of
competition. Well below. Yes.
Yes. Rob Osgood. Let's face it, and I'm being honest, this is a true gut check game. Man up. This is for players and coaches. It's that easy. And Rob, I don't disagree with you. Is who do you want to be?
No.
What do you want to be remembered by? because I'm telling you, if this team runs the table and goes 10-3, for example, we'll have some things to say about the start. And imagine what this team could have been if they'd have flipped and beat Marshall and Stanford, two teams that aren't good, right? But we can also be talking about this team. I mean, look, at 4-3 with 3 ranked teams coming up on your schedule, it's not a given that Notre Dame's going to be bowl eligible. They need 2 more wins to get bowl eligible. And they have a loss to Stanford and they have a loss to Marshall, which means they can lose to Navy or Boston College. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Would it shock me? It'd shock me. The point, however, is how hard it is to figure this team out. I don't know what they're going to be from week to week. Their 3 best games so far have been against their 3 best opponents. Their 3 worst games so far against their 3 worst opponents. I have no freaking clue who this team is, right? But it's but you're going to be remembered more for what you do the next 5 weeks than you will be for what you did before. And that's what I hope these kids take pride in. Is look, all the noise, all the coaching stuff, all this, all that. It's like what we said last week, Ryan. My dad raised me to believe something very, very, very strongly, and I believe to my core. He goes, you can't control what other people do to you. You can only control how you respond. And if you respond in a way that's just as bad as you were treated, then you're no better than the person who's mistreating you. It's not an excuse to not handle your business the right way. Because your coach is a jerk and is screwing you over, it's not his fault that you don't go out and practice hard and you don't stay locked in. You don't do this. Much easier said than done. And I'm saying that now as a 44-year-old who has some experience in life, right? So much harder advice to take when I was 18, 19, and 20 years old, and even younger at times. But that's who these kids need to be. It's like, hey, look, I know the coach isn't playing you. I know you're not getting the ball as much as you need to. I know you're not, but you need to be locked in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You need to go in there and play as hard as you can. And then you can deal with this other stuff after the year. But you're here right now. And yeah, you're not being put in a great situation, but in that situation, go ball out. Right? I know, like Chris Tyree's a perfect example. My advice to him would be, and I think he's doing this so far, is, hey, you're not being put in a great situation, but he's playing hard in those bad situations. And so keep doing that. And that's the thing I would hope more guys would do is like, look, I know you're not doing what you want to do, or you think playing as much as you need to play, but you got a chance to be a part of something that can really get this thing rolling. And people will remember that much more than they'll remember the losses. There'll be a lot of what ifs and woulda, coulda, shouldas, but they're going to be excited about what this team has moving forward. And you can be a big part of that. Or you can be part of a second half collapse. And then we're talking about Notre Dame basically just moving on from you. Who do you want to be?
Yep.
And that's my challenge. And it's not, look, Tom Maurice doesn't have any say on how hard you practice, how much you focus, how much film you study, how serious you're taking this game. He doesn't impact that. That's all on you, right? He can impact if you get 5 snaps or 25 snaps, sure. But he can't impact what you do on those 5. And that's the mindset that they have to take. And if the players can take that, then they got a chance to do something special. There's no doubt.
Yep.
And I think a lot of that is from Rob is there. It's gut check time, right? Because what is a gut check to you, Ryan? To me, it's about me now. What am I going to do? I'm backed against the wall. Things are hard. All right, it's time for me to man up, right? Like you said, and go out and handle my business. And nobody else has a say over that. Nobody else has a say over how I handle my business. Only I do.
Yeah,
that's my thoughts.
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, it means the same thing to me, right? Like, there's no excuses around you, right? Like, there's no scapegoats. There's nothing that you can lean on. Like, it's a gut check is the ultimate opportunity to show that you can handle things, right? That you can handle adversity. And I agree, Rob. I think that we've had a couple of these already, if I'm being honest, but like, this is another big opportunity. I mean, because you're playing against a ranked opponent on the road after a less than convincing victory against a UNLV team that you were just flat out better than. It's a big opportunity for gut check because this paints the picture of the rest of the season against a couple good teams coming forward. So I agree. It is a gut check, ultimate gut check.
Let's go to the next question, Ryan. I wanted to get down here for this one from Rob Thedoff because this is something I wanted to address. And it's a good question, but I don't think we're not on the same page here. It says, Brian and Ryan, I always seem to hear the term get right game, but it seems to be brought up when playing lower tier competition. Shouldn't a get right game be against quality competition? I don't think you're quite we're not defining a get right game as the same thing, Rob. First of all, I don't agree with the premise that it's always against lower competition, or it seems to be, because we viewed the North Carolina game as a get right game.
Yep.
Now, North Carolina was good. They were undefeated at the time. But what we viewed it as a get-right game, Ryan, because they didn't match up well with Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really bad on defense, which meant it was a chance to get right. A get-right game is a game, Rob, the very nature of it is you're playing something inferior. And the goal being like, you're not playing Ohio State. You're not having to scheme out of your mind to beat this team. It's about you just going out, getting your fundamentals right, getting your mind right, executing and gaining some confidence. And that usually happens against a lower tier team. So the very notion of a get right game, Rob, to me, and Ryan, you can agree or disagree with that, is that you are playing something inferior. You are facing something inferior where the pressure's not as high, the stakes aren't as high, where you can kind of get back to basics a little bit. So that's why, to me, get right game is usually going to be against a lower tier competition or a good team with a bad part of their team that you can get right against. And that's what the North Carolina game was for us. At least it was for me.
Yeah, I think that there might be a little confusion between a get right game and a stat padding game, right? Like they're not the same thing, right? A stat padding game is against a team that you just like, you're going to roll over, right? Like you're going to beat them like 60-0. And that's the game where, Isaiah Foster going to come in and be like, I'm going to get 3 sacks today. That's the game where, running back X is going to come in and say, 150 today, 2 touchdowns. Like that's a stat padding game. A get right game, to Brian's point, and I agree with it 100%, Brian. That's kind of how I define it as well, is when you're struggling in a certain area, whether that is offensively, defensively, or as a whole team scope. I have a chance to right the ship today because I am better in this area than where they are, right? So that's what a get right game has always been for me. Not a stat padding game, but a get right game.
Yeah. So yeah, we're on the same page there. We're on the same page there. So I hope that explains it, Rob. I think it's just looking at it from a different standpoint. Look, every game is a chance for you to get right if you're struggling, but there's a specific way that we use that term. Next question is from Mike Sullivan. He says, just in case Tommy, I just had to show this because this was really funny. It made me laugh. He goes, just in case Tommy is listening, please make sure you tell him it would be dumb to play Tobias Merriweather and throw it to him. I play this game with my kids. It's called reverse psychology. I laugh because I have thought about that at times. I have literally thought, and I was this way under Brian Kelly, and I'm this way with Tom Reese, that like I feel like sometimes, and it's not necessarily me per se, I do think that's part of it, but more so just the growing noise that is I often get blamed for, which I'll own that, is like he's not going to do this because people are calling for it. Like he didn't play Tobias as soon as he would have because people were calling for it, because the media, people like myself, and we weren't alone, were calling for it. He's not going to change the run game because we're calling for it. So I've thought about like, well, I wonder if I went out and was like, you know what, this would be the dumbest game ever to run a bunch of outside zone and buck sweeping. So this would be the dumbest week to execute a buck sweep concept. I mean, why would you want to run something against a team that slants and stunts where if you catch them in the right blitz, maybe open up a huge hole? Why would you want to do something like that? This is definitely not the week for that, right? And just thinking like, maybe some reverse psychology works. That's how nuts all this is, Ryan, is because it's like I'm left grasping for that type of answer because it's so absurd what they're doing, or in this case, not doing. You know what I mean? It's just like, because there's just no, I said this about Brian Kelly. I could always, and Van Gorder, I could always at least understand why they did what they did or didn't do what they weren't doing. I thought it was dumb, or I disagreed with it, or I thought it was a wrong thing, or whatever extreme, variation of what they're all different reasons and all different reactions. But I thought I could at least understand it. I can't fathom why Tommy Reese is doing what he's doing half the time. Like I can't think of an explanation that would make any sense, even if I disagree. Because, like, you know how football is, Ryan. 2 coaches, the same personnel that are both really good coaches, are going to look at a 3rd and 5 play in the same game against the same opponent in the same circumstance with the same tendencies and run 2 completely different plays. Mm-hmm. And neither is necessarily wrong. One may work, one may not work. And the one I may say, you know what, like, I didn't like that call because here – and it didn't work, but I at least understood why he was trying to do what he did. It just didn't work out. I half the time I'm like, I got nothing. I have no clue why he's running that play out of that period. I have no clue why he's not doing this, why he's not doing it. I have no clue why they're not running outside at all. I have no clue why Tobias isn't playing. I have no clue why They're doing a lot of things they're doing. I have no clue why Chris Tyree has turned into an A-gap power back. I have no idea why they stopped using the running backs. I went back and looked at the games like, okay, were there some things they were doing schematically to take the running backs out of the game? Nope. Nope, because they stopped using them before teams even adjusted. They just maybe assumed that they were going to adjust. I got nothing, Ryan, and that's frustrating because I can't defend that. I can't defend – like I can defend here's why Ryan made that call in this game. I didn't agree with it, but I understand why he did it. I got nothing. I got nothing. And that's what makes it so frustrating.
You know what else you can't defend? Chris Tyree on the edge, but another conversation for a different day.
Sure. I see what you did there. I dig it. I wanted to respond to this question. I have no clue who this person is or where they're coming from, but Goss and DM. Didn't Dino Babers beat Notre Dame while coaching Bowling Green? No. Notre Dame and Bowling Green have only played each other once in football ever. Yeah. It was 2019, and Notre Dame beat them 52-0. Dino Babers has faced Notre Dame at Syracuse twice, lost both games. He coached at UCLA when they played Notre Dame in 2006 and 2007, lost both times. He was the running backs coach in 2006, the game that Brady Quinn had the late comeback, and then he was the assistant head coach and running backs coach in 2007, the year that Notre Dame went out there and beat Notre Dame as part of a 3-9 team. Notre Dame went 3-9 that year. 2 of their wins were in California, which I found interesting. Dino Babers was also part of the 2003 Pittsburgh team that also lost to Notre Dame. So I don't believe – I'm going to have to go back. And Notre Dame did not lose to Purdue from 1991 to 1993. And so Coach Babers was also on those 3 teams. Or he was at Purdue from 1991 to 1993. And Notre Dame beat Purdue in 91, 45-20. They beat Purdue in 1992, 48-0. And they beat Purdue in 1993, 17-0. So I don't think Dino Babers, I'm looking at his record, 01 to 02. That was the only question that I had, Ryan. I know that Notre Dame played Texas A&M at some point in time, but I don't think that they lost. So I'm going to try to find that, but I don't think that he has been a part of a team that has beaten Notre Dame at this point in time. Yeah, he was at A&M in 01 to 02, but Notre Dame played A&M in 2000 and beat A&M in 2000. They didn't. I don't think they played. Okay, so yes, he was. This is the one I thought. They did beat Notre Dame in 01, his first year at Texas A&M. They did beat Notre Dame at Texas A&M 24-3. So that is the only time. That was the last year of the Bob Davie era. So that is the only time in Dino Babers' career. So he's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's played against Notre Dame 9 times, coached against Notre Dame 9 times that I can count. And Notre Dame is 8-1 in those games. The only exception being the last year of the Bob Davie tenure. So no, Dino Babers has never been part of a team, especially as a head coach, that beat Notre Dame. So just once as an assistant in 2001. So there you go. Wanted to answer that question for you. All right. Ian Johnson with a mailbag question up here. He says, who has the hotter seat, Jimbo Fisher or Brian Harsin?
That's a tough one, actually, I think. I mean, because they're so different situations, right? It's like Jimbo's pulling in a lot of talents, but isn't developing very well, right? He hasn't won consistently. And Brian Harsin, I mean, I don't think he's done either one of those things, right? So it's kind of like, I guess Harsin? I think Harsin gets fired before Jimbo, but I think they're both on the hot seat.
See, to me, that's a different conversation on who's got the hotter seat and who gets fired first, because a $50 million difference in buyout is going to have a big say on who gets fired. I may want to fire my guy worse than you want to fire your guy, but I may not be financially able to do it. Although I feel like if A&M can fork over the dollars to buy last year's recruiting class, then they can fork over the dollars to buy out Jimbo Fisher. But this last week's loss to South Carolina was rock bottom for them. And I'm really curious to see how this team responds, Ryan. Very curious how this team responds, because that's the thing. Here's the the biggest difference between Jimbo and Brian Harsin. Say whatever you want about Brian Harsin, but I've watched Auburn play several times this year, and They got embarrassed by Penn State, embarrassed. And I said, they're going to quit. They're going to quit on him. And you know what they did? The exact opposite. Now they've lost 3 of the 4 games since then, but they've battled every game. Even the game they got blown out by Georgia, they didn't quit. Like, they played hard. They still have talent. And I don't think he's a fit there. Jimbo's team is just flat out like quit multiple times this year. We just got embarrassed multiple times this year. And with significantly better players. So, and then they got Ole Miss coming up this weekend. Then they're home against Florida. Then they're at Auburn. What's going to be interesting is to see if both of those coaches are still there when they go. It's more, is Harsin going to be there? Is Harsin going to be there when they play Texas A&M? Now they have a home game against Arkansas this week. Then they're at Mississippi State before they play Texas A&M. They've got to beat Arkansas at home this week to have a chance. If they lose to Arkansas this week at home, it could be it. It could be it for him. And then they go Mississippi State. And Mississippi State is the most bipolar team in college football, depending on if they're home or away. I mean, they are such a different team at home than they are. Here's what they've done. Here's what they've done at home. They blew out Memphis, blew out Bowling Green, blew out Texas A&M, blew out Arkansas. Here's what they've done on the road. Good win over Arizona, lost to LSU by 15, lost to Kentucky by 10, got blown out by Alabama. They are the weirdest team when it comes to how the extremes from one to another, right? And so Jonathan Gabrick says Ole Miss is so overrated. Now, here's the funny thing is I caught a lot of flack last week on the board. I forgot to put my top 25 up. I got to do it this week. But I put my top 25 up last week, and I had Ole Miss like 12th or 13th behind multiple one-loss teams. And I'm like, who have they beat that really impressed you, right? Like, they made A.J. Swan look like a star. Then the next week they made Auburn's run game look like a vintage like 2013 Auburn run game. You know, so like the SEC to me this year is kind of overrated again, right? I think it is. But it's still, though, A&M's reeling. Like, they're reeling big time right now. And, you know, I don't know if they're going to be able to beat Ole Miss at home. I really don't. I mean, they couldn't beat – they had to score a couple times against A&M to even – or against South Carolina to even make it respectable looking, Ryan. Like, it was like 10-point lead, and then they'd scored and make it a 3-point game, and then South Carolina would go down and score again. Like, they're bad.
Well,
they're bad.
Brian, I mean, they're playing with their backup quarterback, so
yeah,
it's very sarcastic,
right?
By the way,
very
sarcastic.
I get it. Trust me, I get it. Their backup quarterback, who was their starter at the beginning of the year,
who won the offseason battle,
right?
Yeah,
right, exactly. It's not like he started the year because the other guy was hurt, right? Like, it wasn't that. He started the year because he beat the other guy out. Now, I don't think he should have, but you know, whatever. We shall see. We shall see. Somebody said Notre Dame better get Anthony Lucas on speed dial if he enters the portal. If he's one of the guys that got suspended for what we're hearing got suspended for, there's no way in heck he's going to be able to come to Notre Dame. Nor would you. No. So I won't say it publicly, but Ryan, you've heard why those freshman studs. I mean, it was Denver Harris, and it was 3 highly ranked guys. And then there's a fourth one that hasn't been confirmed yet, but rumors are that it's Anthony Lucas. If what they're accused of getting in trouble for, and again, it's just rumors right now, so I don't want to say it publicly. That is one of the dumbest, like, you're an idiot. Like, you're an idiot if that's what you're doing. An idiot. And I don't want an idiot on this football team, no matter how talented he may be, because a kid like that can bring you down. So, and you know how much I love Anthony Lucas as a player. But hopefully he wasn't, because he seems like a nice kid, comes from a good family. I hope that he's not one of the kids that got involved in that. That's all I'll say. Let's see here. Let's get to these next ones. Sean Green, is there going to be an IB sighting in New York this Saturday? So Ryan and I are both planning on driving up Friday. We'll be grabbing dinner somewhere. I'm not quite sure where. We'll have to figure all that out. But I don't know if we're going to have time to kind of do a gathering, because we're leaving after the show, and it's going to be tough. And then he's leaving right after the game, but we'll see. We'll see if maybe we might do something. But if you all get together to tailgate and you're all hanging out, let us know, and we'll swing by if we can, especially if it's like near the Carrier Dome. We'll definitely come by and say hi for sure. So let me know. And then Sean Green also said, this is my 3rd time seeing Notre Dame play Syracuse, first time in the Dome. I'm pretty excited to see it there. That's the thing I'm excited about, Ryan, is I am very excited to watch a game of the Carrier Dome.
I've never
Just
been there
thinking of
before.
all the
So.
yeah, me neither. Just thinking of
Yeah.
and it's funny is there's been some history football wise. I mean, I grew up watching Marvin Graves and then Don McNabb playing there, and then just watching Rocket Ismail's younger brother, the missile, play there. And
Oh,
you've seen
Quadri.
yeah, man. And then but the more so for me is as a kid, I loved college basketball. I actually loved college basketball before I fell in love with college football. I mean, I loved college basketball for a long time. And Syracuse is one of those teams I rooted. They weren't my favorite team, but they were one of the teams I really liked and rooted for. I mean, going back to like Sherman Douglas when they played Indiana for the championship, but then Adrian Autry and Billy Owens and Derek Coleman and just some of those great teams that they had. I always liked Syracuse. I like the cursive. Right, I wish they would go back to that. Sometimes they'll do it like a throwback, but I love the cursive Syracuse on their jerseys. Love Syracuse. I mean, I really liked watching Syracuse play a ton growing up. So, I mean, it's just thinking of all the huge basketball games that have been played there, more than even some of the football games, So I'm excited to – I don't know we're probably going to be like in the corner with a terrible angle. That's how a lot of those stadiums are, but I'm very much looking forward to seeing a game there. No doubt.
I just want to walk around in there, just to walk and just do that stuff. So,
and I'm trying to think. This will be my third time seeing Notre Dame and Syracuse play. I was not at fourth time. So I'm trying to think. Hold on. I don't think I was at the 14. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if I was at that game or not. I don't think I was at the 2014 Syracuse game. I can't remember if I was or wasn't, to be completely honest with you. But I was at the 16 game in Jersey. Was there for that. I was at the 18 game in Yankee Stadium. My wife actually shot that game too, so we were actually both there. And then of course I was at I think that's it. That's the only two I believe I've been at. So they've played 4 times under Kelly. I for the life of me cannot remember. Oh, I was at the 2014 game. I remember now. Because I had a huge fiasco getting there, Ryan. So I drove to Chicago, and they canceled my flight because some guy had committed suicide by lighting himself on fire in one of the towers. So they canceled all the flights. Yeah. So I got a flight out of St. Louis. So I had to get a rental car. I'm not going to lie. I was driving really fast from Chicago to St. Louis, got there with less than an hour before my flight took off, jumped on my flight from St. Louis, and then flew in that night for the game. So I was at that game. So I blocked it out of my head because it was such a crazy weekend. But yes, I was at that game because I'm remembering who I worked for at the time, and it would have had to have been that game because I wasn't working for that person the next time the two teams played. So this will be my 4th time watching them play. So 14, 16, 18, and then this year. So, So I didn't go to the 20 game, because you can only have – it was the COVID year. You can only have one person in the box at a time. So I let Vince go to that game. So I watched that one from home. So, it was – get started on that. But anyway, my 4th time watching them play and my first time at the Carrier Dome. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
All right. Chris Davison says, well, Brian, if you're wondering what it's like to have kids, covering Notre Dame is very similar. You repeat yourself over and over and pray they're listening. That's a really – really well put, Chris. really, really well put. Michael Johnson said, sounds like the Marshall defense. Ryan, that's not a bad example, right? I mean, better, but good secondary, right? Very underrated secondary.
Yeah.
All right. Undersized, but penetrating defensive line, active linebackers.
Good.
Michael, they're a little different structurally and schematically, but that's a good comparison.
That's not that bad.
Their talent level, because Marshall's got a very good defense this year. They rank, I believe they're still a top 20 defense in scoring defense. I believe they are still there.
I still really like their linebackers, man. Eli Neal and Abraham Beauplan. I thought they were really good pair of linebackers. You were talking about them. You were talking about them in the corners all week going into that game. We tried, now there's still no excuse for them to lose. But Marshall ranks 11th in scoring defense and 8th in total defense. So I think that's a very good comparison. Very good comparison. Interesting.
Strengths and undersized, how they again schematically different, but very similar. I like that one. I like that one a lot. It's a good one, Michael. Milton fan with a mailbag question. Brian, I'm not a fan of firings, but I'm not seeing how Tom Reese comes back for two reasons. One, quarterback development recruiting. Two, culture, player management, philosophy, thoughts. I'm bringing this up because I want to say this, and I'm going to say it again, and I don't want to have to keep repeating myself. But if you know I'm not a fan of firings, then don't ask me to speak on firings during the season. There's nothing productive for me or for what we do or for Notre Dame for us to talk about firing a coach right now. There's nothing good that can come out of it. What we're going to talk about now till the end of the season is what Tommy Rees needs to do to get this offense rolling. And Milton fan, you can talk about it all you want. But we're not going to talk about that. Like we're not. They're not going to fire him. I'm not calling for them to fire him. I don't think they should fire him. I think what Marcus Freeman needs to do is sit down and have a conversation with Tom Rees, and they need to figure out how they can structurally put this thing together to be successful on offense, Ryan. That's just not something I care to talk about, nor will it be a topic of conversation on any of the Irish Breakdown channels. So, I mean no disrespect by that. It's just I want us to move on to more productive conversations than firing. I don't necessarily disagree with those things being issues at all. Milton, I mean, I'm not really disagreeing with you per se. It's just firing is not something I'm thinking about. But has development and recruiting a quarterback been an issue, Ryan? Yeah. Is there a culture, player management philosophy problem with Tom Rees? Yeah. But my issue right now is fixing it. Because you're not firing anybody right now. Fix it. That's what I care about.
It's like yesterday on the show, Brian, people wanted to start talking about some guys that might be like portal options for Notre Dame and stuff. And I'm just like, guys, like when a guy enters a portal, I'll talk about him. I'll break him down and like what the fit could be, all that type of stuff. But I just don't want to speculate, Like I feel like you get in a really gray area with that type of stuff. And you've been a coach, you know it, man. Like people lose their jobs, and it's deeper than just like a fan getting what they want. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah.
I mean, now in Tommy's case, he's not a married guy and doesn't have kids, but it doesn't mean it stings any less, And so, his dad works there and he's been in Notre Dame a long time. It's just, look, we'll address that when the time comes, but there's just nothing good that's going to come out of that conversation right now, in my opinion. Just fix the problem, right? Yes. And if you were going to do that, that window has passed, and so you're definitely not going to do it now. Next question is from Michael Morris. Brian and Ryan, do you think Tommy Rees plays the best player at certain positions? And if you don't think he does, why? Ryan, I'm going to let you answer this one first because I have a very strong opinion on this one, and I want to see what your thoughts are first.
I don't think that Notre Dame plays – let me phrase this the best way possible. I do think that there's some allegiance, not even just from Tommy Rees, but I think that there is an allegiance in certain cases on the coaching staff to playing players that they kind of gravitate towards for whatever reason. So, I mean, to answer the question blankly, Michael, I don't think that Notre Dame has done a great job of playing the best player all the time, right? It's the one that they're comfortable with. And we've talked a lot about what comfort means for a player, right? And why, what players on the offense right now for Notre Dame should you be totally comfortable with? I mean, like the offensive line, you should be feeling pretty comfortable with Michael Mayer, but I mean, this conversation always comes back to like wide receivers, right? It always does because it's like why are you not playing Tobias? And it's fair. It's a fair conversation to have. And so I mean, to answer the question, Michael, no, I don't think that he always plays the best player. Why that happens? I think that there is a comfort and allegiance to the players that a little deeper, like a deeper level, and the guys that you trust to do what is going to be asked of them, like no wild cards. So it's just a muddled conversation, man. Like it is. It's because Brian, there's fault in just the mindset, right? I mean, you're not playing your best players because you want comfort in, just you want a higher floor, right? But like that floor doesn't get you over the top. So it's just such a flawed conversation and mindset because I think that it really does limit you. So that's just kind of how I feel about it. I do think that there is a lot of mismanagement of talents at certain positions. There's no doubt about it.
I do think he plays favorites. I don't think he always plays the best guy. I think he plays favorites. And I think a lot of times favorites are either guys he's recruited or guys that maybe he gets along with better. I think this is one of the things that can be part of an immaturity as a coach when you're young and you kind of have the ego that he has. I think sometimes, maybe a kid you just don't click with personally, and then that impacts your decision making. I think that's part of it, but I think another part of it is he's going to play guys that fit his system more so than maybe guys who would be the best player because he wants to be able to do what he does. I think that's part of it as well, Ryan. And so I think a lot of it's just immaturity, to be completely honest with you. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, Ryan. It's just immaturity.
A lot of immaturity in the chat right now, call me a DJU lover or something like that in the chat.
Yeah, that's
right now.
that's not even an immature. That's just pure insanity right there. But I do think Jonathan was joking on that one.
Yeah, I know.
Look, here's the thing about the portal thing that you brought up, Ryan, that I think is important to discuss. Is what people have to understand too is sometimes we may hear certain names, but if we start broadcasting it, then that may make it harder for Notre Dame to be able to actually land that kid. I look at the Jackson Arnold situation. It was very, very unlikely Notre Dame was going to have any chance with Jackson Arnold. Very unlikely. But the little glimmer of hope you had was that it was kept private and you could maybe get him on a campus before anything was said, right? And then once it got out there, it's gone. So, let's say Notre Dame is eyeing a certain kid right now. Let's say we people know that I have sources at Notre Dame. Let's say I threw out the name of a quarterback right now, kid that's not in the portal, and then that kid jumps in the portal and goes to Notre Dame. What do you think people are going to say? Notre Dame tampered. How else did Driscoll know? When in fact I didn't know, right? I just threw a name out. Or if I did know someone they may have their eye on, then it comes out and it's like, well, yeah, Notre Dame tampered. How does that help anyone? It doesn't. So it's just not something that we're going to do. Sometimes y'all have to understand timing is important. Timing matters. There's a time and a place to talk about things, and there's a time and a place when things are inappropriate to talk about, or just not necessarily inappropriate, but just not the right time. And that's our thoughts on that. Christopher Galloway, hello, Brian. Glad to see you are better. I'm not really better, but I'm just powering through. The reason I didn't do it yesterday is because, I had Vince and Ryan could cover for me. There's just nobody else to cover for the 1 p.m. show, so I got to suck it up and deal with it. But I appreciate that. Milton Fan 15. Brian, you say they run the scan to get the perfect play, but they just keep throwing it to double, triple covered Michael Mayer. This is one of those ones, Milton Fan, where there are sometimes I think fans think that where the ball goes is where it was designed to go. And that's not always the case. They're not calling us, hey, we're going to run this play. And now look, Mayer's going to be triple covered, but that's part of our plan. Right? And here's the thing, is if Michael Mayer is double and triple covered, guess what else that means, Ryan? Somebody else is open. And that's been the thing. So now my thing is there have been a lot of plays this year where receivers are coming open and the ball's not getting there. And so people say, well, doesn't that mean Tom Rees is calling good plays? Yeah, in the pass game, I think Tom Rees has called a lot of good plays this year, the pass game. I think his run game design stinks. I think that there are times where there are things he should be doing to make his offense even easier that he's not doing. But when he's designed, there's been several games this year where he's designed some really good stuff in the pass game. But the problem is, number one, when that stuff's happening, 4 or 5 times a game and you're throwing the ball 25, 30 times, there's a lot of times where you're not getting guys open because of a lot of the routes we don't like. And that kind of goes into the looking for the perfect play type of thing. But that's number one. Number two, the problem is when you coach like that, Ryan, and you have a younger or an inexperienced group of players, it's like last year we pushed back on this notion of inexperience because you had Mayer who played a lot. You had a lot of offensive linemen who played a lot. You had a quarterback who was a fifth-year senior who'd been a multi-year starter at that point in time, led a team to a Rose Bowl. The whole lack of experience thing didn't fly last year. This team actually is inexperienced. Your best receiver is a guy who only played half of his freshman year, really. Your running backs are all kind of new, not really inexperienced, but I don't really look at experience there. Offensive line-wise, your 2 tackles are relatively inexperienced. Blake Fisher played 2 college football games before this year. Zeke Carell's only started 4 or 5 games in his career, or about 8, 9 games in his career. So in spots you were inexperienced in some spots, but it's especially quarterback, which is even more reason to not do the scan. This is the thing that kills me is if you truly believe that your team lacks talent, the things you're doing are the exact opposite of what you should be doing with a team that you think lacks talent. The stuff you're asking them to do is stuff you should be asking veteran, talented players to do. If you think your team is inexperienced, not talented, the stuff you're doing is the last thing you should do, because all these
100%.
great play calls are things that require receivers to win, right? You have to run this route well and win and get to this spot, and your quarterback has to make the perfect read and get the ball out where it needs to go. There's always a time and a place for that. But a good coach is going to limit those number of plays and then use a lot of the other times to create more plays where you are scheming people open, using RPOs, moving the pocket, doing things like that, mixing up your run game that doesn't require you to actually just have to out-talent people, and that's the problem. So, I think and that's where talk about the inexperience thing, Ryan, is when you are making a quick check, and then your quarterback's got to come back, and he's now got to make a completely different read because you just changed play call, and there's 6 seconds on the play clock. He doesn't have a lot of time to process where I'm going with the ball. And Marcus Freeman made a good point yesterday. He goes, he was exaggerating because I don't think he believes this. He goes, Drew doesn't often, I think I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, but something about how he doesn't just lock in on one guy. The problem is he goes through his progressions too quickly or too slowly. And the too quickly thing has been a big issue. If Mayer's not his number one read, he will quickly work through his progressions to get back to Mayer. Because that's what you do when you're an inexperienced guy. Hey, stick with that read for one more second, and you're going to see Braden Lindsey coming open late. That's an inexperienced thing. And when you do what you're doing with him, you're making it harder for him to process because you're speeding up his read process. When you are giving him full field reads to a younger player, and then now you've had him check at the last second, you're putting him in a position to be unsuccessful. What you can do to be successful: more screen game, more RPOs, more limiting his reads where it's 1-2 check down, stuff like that, 1-2 backside cross, 1-2 backside post, things where you're limiting his reads. You're not doing enough of that stuff to where now when you do call the perfect play, you've put him in such a funky spot that there's a lot more, the margin for error is way smaller. And so when you miss one of those reads, it has a greater impact. So I think those are the issues for me. And yes, it is a Drew Pine problem, but it goes back to what I believe Coach Freeman has said multiple times. Are we putting our players in the best position to be successful? And you're not calling plays to throw into triple coverage. And when there is triple coverage, it means somebody else is open. And you're not doing a good enough job teaching your quarterback to get to that point. And that's the issue. His play calling in the run game stinks. His lack of use of RPOs stinks. But Tommy Rees can design some really good pass plays. And with a more experienced quarterback, this stuff would be working a lot more. But that's the problem. You don't have that. And you're not fixing it. You're not changing it to fit your kid. You're asking Drew Pine to run what you did with Jack Cohn last year, and he's not Jack Cohn. All right, now. And that's the problem. That's Drew's fault. No, it's your fault. You're not putting him in a position to be successful. Simple as that. Trucker Joe, great name, by the way. I don't think Reese realizes that when you have more talent than the opposition, most every play is the perfect play. #ban the scan. That's a great point, Joe. There's nobody in the country that shows less confidence in his players, in my opinion, than Tommy Rees. And I agree. Sometimes, hey, I don't care what, they don't need to have the perfect coverage. We taught it correctly. Get the ball out. Run the play, get the ball out. And there's a time and a place for the perfect play stuff, Ryan. There is.
It's also, Brian, I mean, defensively, the team that you're going against, right? They're not in the perfect defense every play either. Like they're not, like, there's going to be players that are unsure of their assignment. There's going to be guys that blow their assignment. There's going to be a guy that slants the wrong way. Like, all those things happen, man. And we know, I mean, we just talked about Syracuse, right? Syracuse has a bunch of post-snap movements, right? Like, they're not a team that's just like sitting in too high. You know it's going to be cover 2 or cover 4. Not necessarily, right? So it's just, it is a lack of confidence. It is. Like, at the core, it's a lack of confidence. in yourself to a degree, right? Because you didn't call the right play to begin with, but it's even more of a lack of confidence of sometimes players and these athletes, all these 4-star kids that you're recruiting, right? All these top 200 ranked recruits nationally, they'll surprise you, man, because they're talented football players. Take the leash off. Let's see what they can work with, man. I mean, just let it fly a little bit. Like there's just he plays. Coach Reese coaches like, and I know you've talked about this before, Brian, that he's talked about that they have a lower margin for error, right? Well, you make it that way. You make it that way, and you coach that way. That's the yeah.
You coach them into that. That's the
exactly.
You coach them into that smaller margin for error. If you truly have a smaller margin for error, then you should be doing the exact opposite of what you're doing from a game plan play calling standpoint. Exact 100%. Opposite.
Yep.
And that's
you shouldn't want a defense to get adjusted to what you're doing. Like that's 100%.
Right. We are not Marshall. Why do I get the feeling that Driscoll has pulled his hair out 50 times this year already? He has used the word if 4 times today. I got all my hair, same amount of hair as I always do. A little bit more. I need a haircut soon. But no, I don't pull my hair out. I'm not going to punish myself because somebody else is an idiot. So, yeah. But it's frustrating. But to your point, it is frustrating to see so much of this stuff where you're just like, it's unnecessary. It just doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Sean Lucero with a super chat. Thank you, Sean. How do you attack a stacked box with press coverage? Are there better ways than receivers having the low percentage deep shots to get them to back off the run? Well, first of all, you do need to hit some of those shots, right? And that requires better releases off the line. Requires 3 things: better releases off the line, better throws, and a little bit more creativity to try to get them free off the line. That's clear. You do need to hit some of the shots outside. You do need to hit the shot to Tobias Merriweather. Those things are needed, in my opinion, to beat teams that are playing press coverage. But then also, the other way to attack stack coverage, Ryan, is to use your secondary receivers. And I don't mean secondary receivers in like your secondary talents, but doing things where you're running people off and then getting free in space. That's one of the best ways to attack a loaded box is against man coverages. I'm going to go with a 3-by-1 alignment. And I'm going to run, if I'm facing a stacked box, I'm going to have my tight end in a wing, and I'm going to probably have him kind of chip and do something off to the edge or like maybe just run a wheel route. I'm going to run some kind of like double verts or a deep in and a post or some kind of deep high-low to the field. And then I'm running something where I'm just bringing my receiver across because there are 1 of 2 things is happening. If they're in a tight box, they're going to overreact to that cross and run with him, which opens up my stuff over the middle, either the seam over the top or the in breaking routes over the top. You can also do like a vertical from your seam and then bring a deep in from the outside. Things like that can work. Purdue hit some of that stuff against Syracuse. But if they are king the run, and if you run it off play action, then all of a sudden you get that guy out. Once he clears linebacker level, you've got room to get that ball out there. And you can get in some catch and runs. Now, Notre Dame has done that a couple times this year, and Lorenzo Styles has dropped the ball. So they've done it a couple times, but there's a lot of things like that you can also do when you're playing a stacked box. I think vertical levels is a really effective scheme against a loaded box because either they're going to stay up and you get behind it, or what they'll do too, Ryan, defensively is when they are up, then they are extra aggressive getting depth, which then can open up some of the under stuff. So other things that you and I've talked about, Ryan talked about earlier, do some post-snap switch stuff, run some trail stuff. A concept that I see a lot of teams use that Notre Dame rarely uses is, run some vertical stuff off to get guys going and then just bring, like I just said, like the crossing route underneath it to the boundary as well. You can do that as well. Run clear routes and run like a delay wheel. There's things like that they can do that are effective against teams loaded box. And then, the best way, one of the best ways to do that is attack the screen or attack the perimeter screens. I mean, that's a great way to do it as well, Ryan, is, use the bubble screens. Because if those corners are playing up, you can block them off. Put Michael Mayer out there, block them off, run some bubbles, run some screens. And then if they want to get too aggressive, that's where you have some double moves. I have never seen a team that gets defended so aggressively as Notre Dame and refuses to use double moves. No option middles. I mean, as aggressively as teams play Michael Mayer on option outs, an option out back to the middle is going to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
You only got to hit it once or twice. The fact that they don't use any of that stuff is also very confusing because it's perfect stuff to use against teams that are as aggressive as they are against Notre Dame. I don't understand it. Like, you're playing so much single high coverage. How are you not using double moves and wide fades and post switches and things like that? It doesn't make any sense. It
Especially
really
with how
doesn't
your
make any
offensive
sense.
line's blocking too. I mean, pass
Right.
blocking wise, right? Like you're gonna have plenty of time off of some of those double moves too. It's just, it's frustrating.
Yeah. Jonathan Gabrick says, "How much does the super chat need to be to grow a mullet? I will pay it. I swear. There's no way I'm ever growing a mullet. There's no amount of money you can put.
Everyone has their price, Brian. Everyone has their
No.
price. No,
Nope.
you don't have a price.
Nope. Not for a mullet.
If someone sent you a $10 million super chat, you wouldn't get a mullet.
Man, money's not everything, buddy. Money's not everything. Okay.
Hair grows
But
back,
hey,
though.
if somebody wants to test that theory, we can. We can try to test that theory. But no, that's not happening. That's not happening. All right, next one. That was a good one from Sean Lacero. Ben Tarnowski says, "Bring in Josh Gaddis or Garrett Riley next year, and it will be all good." Okay, Josh Gaddis, heck to the no. That is a hard pass for me. I'm not a big Josh Gaddis fan. I wasn't a fan of Josh Gaddis last year at Michigan. I'm not a fan of Josh Gaddis this year at Miami. I'm just no. I'm a hard pass.
What's the fascination with Josh Gaddis? Is the recruiting? I guess is that like the fascination?
No,
it's weird.
I don't know. I don't get.
Garrett Riley's at TCU, right? He's the TCU guy. Yeah.
Here's my concern with Garrett Riley.
Uh-huh.
Now, the job they're doing this year is tremendous. I mean, Brian, I've watched about 4 or 5 TCU games this year. They're really creative on offense, really creative. However, I would get a little nervous about bringing in a very young, because Garrett Riley is very young. He's 33. He's a very young guy. He's been around for a while, right? Coached with his brother at East Carolina. He was at Kansas for several years. He was at App State 19. He was at SMU as the OC for 2 years under Sonny Dykes at SMU. My concern, however, is this. I love what they're doing, but it's kind of like Jeff Lebby at Oklahoma. I liked what they did at Ole Miss, but the question was, okay, is that more Lincoln Riley or Jeff Lebby?
Right.
And where with Lincoln Riley, when he was at East Carolina, his head coach was a defensive guy. So you kind of knew that was Lincoln's offense. My fear of someone who is an outsider looking in, and I would want to do research on Garrett Riley to learn more about him just in general, and this is for any coach, but if you have a defensive head coach, you're bringing in a 33-year-old guy and handing him the keys to the offense, and it's something he's never done. He has Sonny Dykes right there. Sonny Dykes is a really good offensive mind. That's where Sonny Dykes has made his living, right? Wasn't he the coach for Jared Goff? He's developed the number 1 overall draft pick, right? They did some really good things at SMU, and now you see SMU's taking a big step back offensively this year with him not there. That would be my concern. That would be my concern. Now, doesn't mean it's an end-all, be-all because I don't know him. For all we know, Sonny Dykes trusts him implicitly to run the offense. I don't know. I'm just saying, just looking at the resume, guys like that concern me if you're going to bring him in to coach for a defensive coach. That's my 2 cents there. That's my 2 cents there.
Fair.
And that's a pretty big philosophical shift. And that's pure air raid. You know what I mean?
It is pure air raid.
So I'm just not sure I'm comfortable with that either. I'm not a big air raid guy, but the thing I do like about that version of it, as I've said, Ryan, and I've said this before, is I like air raids that run the ball. That's why I like Phil Longo. I don't always necessarily like the way they run the ball. I think Phil Longo's teams are a little bit too passive with their run schemes. But TCU is averaging 227 yards a game rushing the football. So, I mean, they run the ball.
And that's after losing Zach Evans this offseason, too, which is pretty wild.
That's right. Yeah. Who averaged 7 yards a carry for them last year. They were at 196.3 last year, 5 yards a carry. This year, they're at 227.1 and 5.8 yards a carry. So, yeah, they've already rushed for more touchdowns this year than they did last year. And their quarterbacks only run for 274. So it's not like, he's not putting up like Garrett Schrader numbers from last year is my point. 274 is pretty good through 7 games, but it's like, it puts you on pace for what's he at a game? Let me look that up real quick. He's at 39 a game. You know, I mean, so that's a decent number. I mean, you put that out towards 12 games, you know, regular season. That's 468 yards. It's pretty good. That's Ian Book numbers. Yeah. That is Ian Book numbers. It's good, right? But you're not building your offense around the quarterback having to run all the time, which I don't necessarily love. Unless the guy's like dynamic like Lamar Jackson, I'm just not a fan of that in any kind of non-option offense where he's got to run all the time. Archer says, if Jackson Smith-Njigba is unable to get back to full health this year, does he come back for next year? A recent draft projection did not have him in the first round. I would be very curious who did that draft projection. Let me say this to you, Ryan. Especially in a year that is very down at wide receiver, I'd be shocked if Jackson Smith-Njigba came out this year and wasn't a first-round draft pick. As long as he tests well, I'd be shocked.
Well, I mean, No, I agree with that part of the conversation. Like, that's a big layer to it, right? Like, Quentin Johnston's had a couple nice games in a row, but, I mean, Keyshawn Boutte been kind of hamstrung by a struggling LSU passing offense, and Josh Downs has missed a couple football games, and there's just been – it's not a great 2023 wide receiver class just in general right now, as it appears. And I would say the other big thing, too, Brian, is I don't know if you agree with this. We'd love to hear if you do or not. Jackson Smith-Njigba's not a guy that I think is going to – like, I think regardless, he's like Chris Olave to me as far as what his draft projection is going to be, right? Like, he's always just going to be that – like, in that bracket of, you know, he's going to be a 10 to 32 pick, like somewhere in that bracket, right? I don't think if Jackson Smith-Njigba goes back next year, he's all of a sudden this top 5 pick, top 10 pick guy. Like, I don't think that he's – a dynamic player, as in he's going to test off the charts. He's going to run a 4.3 in the 40. He's just a really good football player. So I don't think that he's necessarily going to help his stock a ton. I don't think he's really hurt his stock a ton either. You had a full season last year of seeing exactly what Jackson Smith-Njigba is. And in the glimpses that he's had very limited this year, you've still seen that same player, right? So to Brian's point, down wide receiver class, adding on to it, I also think that it's something where I don't know if he necessarily helps himself that much. Like, I think the NFL likes Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's a really good football player. Consistent is kind of the thing that comes to mind. So I don't think he really helps or hurts himself a ton in that regard for me.
And I think we've seen that the NFL, as long as it's not a devastating, structural injury, which I don't believe his injuries are. I mean, Jamison Williams tore his ACL late in the year.
Yes.
And still
went top 15. Yeah, exactly.
And that's not the first time that's happened either. So I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked.
Yeah,
I'd be shocked, especially in this draft class. I mean, that's the one thing that I've seen almost all draft analysts agree on it. And he said CBS Sports is the one that did it, so I don't know who their draft analysts are.
Don't listen. Don't listen to CBS Sports.
Yeah, I believe they have a bunch of them. So
and none of them are very good, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, humble opinion. It's a good one. We have a super chat. I'm kidding. I have a super chat here from Rick Lane. What's going on with Peyton Bowen? Ryan, I'm just going to quickly answer this one. Same thing's been going on all along. He's committed Notre Dame. He tells Notre Dame he's coming. He tells everybody that I know that he trusts that he's coming. But he also goes on every visit with his brother, as is always the case. And we see people from On3 use all of his visits to generate clicks. That's as far as I know. That's all that I know. I have not heard anything change from talking to Notre Dame commits, from talking to Notre Dame folks around the Notre Dame program. I've heard no one that actually knows Peyton like that thinks that he's going to flip. We don't even hear Jackson Arnold talk about that much anymore. And he used to talk about that all the time. So until we have reason or intel to say otherwise, I mean, we believe he's going to stick with Notre Dame. Ryan, did I say anything out of bounds with that comment? Because my question is, right, if he didn't want to be at Notre Dame, why would he still be in the class?
Yeah, and Brian, we had a similar question asked yesterday, and Nick, I completely understand why you're asking, because again, I mean, he's still taking visits, right? So it's troubling, like it is. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. But people have all freaked out about this Oregon trip, Brian, and I said this point blank yesterday. I was like, hey, there's been legitimate, smoke to Oklahoma, right? Like, that's one that you could be like, okay, like that one makes a little bit of sense, right? One of his very good friends is going there. They're relatively close to his proximity at home, all that type of stuff, right? Like, okay. Oregon? Have you ever heard Peyton Bowen say a word about Oregon before, Brian? Have you heard it? Like, I've never heard. That's a team that I've never heard him say anything about. I just haven't heard it. So we're just catching clicks in certain spots, and it's just that's what we're doing right now. So will Peyton Bowen end up in the class? We'll see. Regardless, though, of this past weekend's visit, if he does end up with a different program, I don't think it's going to be Oregon. So let's not be super hyperbolic with it.
Right. Look, we'll see. We'll see. In this day and age, who knows? But it's just nothing that we've heard makes me think that.
See, I can't stand comments like this that just came out. This is the same thing we said about Dante. What was the same that we just said?
No, it's not.
That was the same with Dante.
That's ridiculous. First of all, Dante was not a public commitment. At no point in time was Dante more a public commitment, number one. Number two, if you're on the message board, you knew we started giving you heads ups on certain things when it was not going in that direction. So if you're going to say that, that's fine, but at least be accurate. At least same thing with Keon. We said, look, until we have reason to believe that Keon's a concern, we're not going to worry about it. But then when we got reason, we told people, right? And if we get reason, but see, with Keon, here's the difference. Keon backed off from his relationships with Notre Dame coaches and players. Peyton hasn't. And that's the difference. Dante's situation is completely different too, because until they got a commitment from CJ Carr, Dante was planning on coming to Notre Dame. I mean, it's not even remotely close to being the same situation. So you got to be a little better than that.
Peyton still plays Madden and all that stuff with the other commits in the class. He's still in the group chat.
Changes,
like,
I'll be concerned.
Yeah, if it changes, we'll let you know. Yeah. That's why you sign up at boards.irishshakedown.com. We'll let you know as soon as that happens.
There you go. So. We have our resident Michigan fan has spoken up about Josh Gaddis. Antoine Johnson says Josh Gaddis is a fraud. He didn't even win that award. That's Jim Harbaugh's offense, and he's not wrong. And then Troy McIntosh said your Garrett Riley concern could be applied to Reese. Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, right? Like once he was given a young offensive, and he's got just as much play calling experience as Garrett Riley does at a bigger level. But once he was then running the offense on his own without an offensive head coach over top of him, look what happened. And I don't even think that much of Brian Kelly, right? And again, that's where I was wrong. I thought it was Kelly holding Reese back. In reality, Reese by himself isn't ready to run an offense by himself with no guidance. That's the point, though, Troy, and that's my concern. So I mean, I think Troy's point is spot on, Ryan, but that's my concern, right? That's my concern is having a young guy that has been under an offensive head coach for so long, kind of handing him the reins and say, go do what you need to do. That's where my concern. So I don't disagree with Troy at all, but that's my issue, right? That's my issue. So now that doesn't mean that if I was a head coach looking for an offensive coordinator, doesn't mean I wouldn't look at Garrett Riley. I flat out would look at Garrett Riley because number one, I like Sonny Dykes a lot as an offensive mind. I think he's a good football coach. And you look at what they're doing this year at TCU, you have to be impressed by that, Ryan. I mean, you just have to be. I mean, they have made huge jump. They were averaging 28.7 points per game in 2021, 30.8 in 2020. They're at 44.7 so far this year. And here's the thing. They've already played two of the three best defenses they're going to play all year. All year. And they scored 43 and 38 points against those two teams. Now, they needed overtime to get to 43 against Oklahoma State, in my opinion. But, I mean, I like what they're doing. Now, the other thing, too, is, this is 7-8 games into his tenure. Teams get film on you, and they find answers. But so far, teams haven't found answers. And I love the game that really impressed me more than any was the Kansas State game. What I liked about TCU, really, actually the last two games, is because they have shown that they are capable of coming from behind. They were down big against Oklahoma State, and they were down big against Kansas State. And they just kept at it. He didn't panic. They didn't get off their game. They just kept plugging away, and eventually stuff started working. They made some little adjustments, and they went. That's what I like. They're not front runners. Their last two games, they've had to come from behind double digits in each of their last two games. And they needed overtime to beat Oklahoma State, but they smacked Kansas State in the second half. I mean, really smacked them in the second half. So good. Again, Troy, I don't disagree with you. I really don't. This one's for you, Ryan. It's an NFL question from Kuba Puig. Do you think Kyle Hamilton will start sometime this season, or do you think the Ravens will continue to play Geno Stone first and have Kyle play the role he's playing?
I mean, honestly, I haven't watched the Ravens enough to know what the role is or what the split is, Kuba, to be honest. I mean, I would think that if you draft a kid 14th overall, that it would be a situation where he would play a ton, at some point in the season. But I'll say this. The reason that it was an interesting pick for the Ravens is that safety wasn't necessarily a need for the Ravens. Like you just mentioned, Stone, but I mean, I'll mention Marcus Williams and I'll mention Chuck Clark. Like they had a really good safety room even before they drafted Kyle. But I think what you're going to see is that Kyle continues to get added reps. And then at some point, he's going to kind of take the reins as the starting safety for them, whether that is the end of this season or whatever. But I think that there's a way to utilize him right now. But I think that the Ravens are one of those teams where the Ravens draft so well because they don't force needs on you, right? They go, I'm going to draft the best player available, and when they fit in is when they fit in type of thing, right? That's what makes them such a successful franchise. That's why Ozzie Newsome was so good, and that's why they're now good under their new general manager. So I think that it's just kind of not forcing the issue. And you knew Kyle Hamilton, again, got drafted into a good safety room. So it's going to be interesting.
Good stuff. Here's some more. Keith Wiegand, a recruiting question as well. The question was actually, here we go. Robert Bishop, since Malik Elzy has decommitted from Cincinnati, do you maybe see Notre Dame making a run for him?
Yeah. So, I mean, somebody asked this on the board as well. They've asked on a couple of shows. No, I mean, the answer is like their fifth receiver that they want in the class is Tayshaun Lyons. That's their guy, right? And before Malik Elzy was committed to Cincinnati, they were recruiting him, but they weren't pushing for him, right? Like
they could have had him in the class, Ryan. If they wanted Malik Elzy, he would have been in Notre Dame's class.
Yeah. So I don't see that changing from what it was then, Robert, to what it is now. Malik Elzy is a good football player. I just think that there are better options on the board.
Well, Fitz too, also, right? I mean,
yes.
Malik Elzy is going to play a similar role to Jaden Greathouse, style play wise. And if there's any crossover with another receiver, it'd be with Braylon James. The thing about Tayshaun Lyons, Ryan, is he's a completely different player than what they have.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, he's that type of kid that could do a little bit of everything, like inside and out. Yeah, I like Lyons a lot, man. He's having a dynamic senior
I like
year,
Malik Elzy. I think he could play defense as well. I just think he's not a Notre Dame guy. Like
he's a physical kid.
If Illinois can flip him, that'd be a huge pickup for them.
I would actually love to see Elzy as a safety down the line, man. Like I think he could play
I
really
liked
good
him as a
safety.
rover. I thought he could play rover.
That really works too.
Yeah. Yep. Archer, B. Ryan, if you had to stop covering Notre Dame and cover another school instead, which one would you want to cover? I know lots of guys change the schools they cover over the course of their careers. For me, Ryan, it would probably be Virginia or Virginia Tech, just because I could be closer to home. That'd be the only reason, just to be close to my family, so I can see my nieces and nephew grow up and things like that. But I'd have no interest in covering another college football team. I mean, it'd be something geographic like that where I'd want to move to a specific place and then I would just cover the team where I would be moving to. That would be the only other reason I would cover anybody else.
I don't really have an answer for this one, Brian. Like I don't really have one, man. It's like I'm covering the team that I've always wanted to cover. Like Notre Dame's the team. So
I think for me, as far as legitimate career moves, is if I was ever to not do this anymore, which again I'm not going anywhere. I love what I'm doing. If anything, I'm going to build on to this empire that we're trying to create here, right? The Driscoll Media empire that Tommy Guns likes to talk about, but. I think your thing would be mine. If you were to not cover Notre Dame, it would be because you're going to do something completely different, like cover the draft or cover. Like if I would just cover college football as a whole. I would start a website where I just talk about college football as a whole, right? Like I would do that instead of going to cover a team. But like I said, if I was going to cover a team, it would be something related to I wanted to move closer to family and cover that team, or I want to live here, and the easiest thing to do is cover that team. But nowadays, it's just like, I mean, you can press conferences are on Zoom. You don't necessarily have to live in the town you cover anymore. It's a lot easier to do that now than it used to be. But
it's true.
That would be my thing. Is I'd probably just cover. I mean, that's something that's in my goals eventually down the road, and we've already started to do a little bit of the CFB Nation podcast. Is eventually I would like to have a site that covers college football as a whole, and that I would do some work for, but that we would eventually transition to, because I think that'd be a lot of fun. Is to not just cover Notre Dame. Notre Dame's always going to be my bread and butter, but just cover college football as a whole.
Oh yeah, I could cover
Josh
Rutgers.
P.
Someone said.
Yeah, there you go. Josh P. Brian and Ryan, what do you think of Scott Frost as a potential OC? Number one, he was a good OC at Oregon. Did a nice job at UCF. But Scott Frost fails every character exam and character background test I could ever give. I would want that guy. And again, I'm not talking about potential OCs right now. I'm just talking about coaches, not even about Notre Dame. But if I was any coach at any school in America, there is no way I would hire Scott Frost as my offensive coordinator. None. Just because of the type of person we've learned that he is, at least since he's been in Nebraska. Yeah. Hard pass. I want no part of that. None.
He is a sharp offensive guy, but yes, to your point, he is not a great person. So
he's not such a good mind that you accept dealing with that. Like I said, he was good at Oregon. He did some good things at UCF, but he's not like this wizard genius that you would sacrifice your integrity for or soul for to hire him.
He's not Lane Kiffin.
But see, here's the thing about Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin, right? I mean, to your point, some of the stuff I've heard about Lane Kiffin at Tennessee is like, whoa. But from everything we've heard, he's changed a lot. Like, he's grown up. He's not that guy anymore, from what I've heard from a lot of different sources.
I haven't heard of anything recently. I mean, the last thing I remember is something at Alabama. But, I mean, to your point, he's been a couple stops. That's a couple stops ago at this point. So you're not wrong. You're not wrong there.
Right. And his family dynamics changed a little bit. So now maybe he hasn't. Maybe it hasn't, but that's just kind of the things I hear. There has to be some sort of change. Hey, man, I screwed up. I hit rock bottom. I've changed as a person. And it would take a little bit of rehabilitation for me to be there. Scott Yerbick asked, do you think there will be any commits that would wait until February to sign instead of signing in December? It's possible, but we don't know of any right now. I think the only way that would change is if there was a coaching change at Notre Dame at a position that might cause a kid to wait. But as of right now, I'd be a little surprised by that, to be honest with you.
Same.
And then Tyler Bedwell asks, and we're getting close to the end here. Tyler Bedwell asks, and I've heard this said a lot, is it me or do we never run simple slant routes? I've always felt that those are easy way to build your quarterback's confidence to deliver the football quickly. Just seems like that is not in the play. But a couple quick things on that. Number one, the tight boxes that Notre Dame runs makes it a little harder to run some of the slant routes that they could run. Number one, inside slants, a lot of times you're running right into the linebackers, right? And the other thing, too, is because teams play the safety so tight, the slant snap stuff where you're hitting outside slants wouldn't work quite as well either, because safeties are right there. So I don't know if slants are necessarily something I would be totally in love with in many instances, but there have been plenty of instances where I think those kind of slant glance routes, glance is a little different than the slant. It can look like a slant a lot of times. Sometimes it looks a little bit different. There are some backside stuff, Ryan, I think they can do with that off RPOs. But the other thing, too, is a slant is not a route that I'm throwing with a quarterback who's not confident.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. Like, slant routes for a quarterback who's trouble seeing things, the last thing you want to do is throw a slant, because he's going to rush the throw and he's not going to see what's coming to it. So
doesn't see underneath coverage, and long day.
Yep. Absolutely. This has been asked by 5 times by the same person, so we'll address it. Mailbag, why doesn't the opponent get called on targeting when it's clear as day, but the officials are so eager to call it on Notre Dame? I can't possibly answer that question. I know that targeting has been called against Notre Dame opponents. The kid from Cal was kicked out for targeting. But I don't understand. Maybe it's the helmet. Maybe the gold helmet. It's easier to see. I don't know. I have no clue. I mean, there's really only been one Notre Dame player called for targeting this year, right? Has anybody else been called for targeting besides JD?
Don't think so.
So, and this goes back in the past too. I mean, there's been blatant targeting that Notre Dame. I don't know why. I think part of it is Notre Dame has ACC officials for their home games, and for the most part, ACC is just not a very good officiating league. They don't pay great. There's some good officials in that league, but there's not a lot of great ACC crews, to be honest with you. So, yep. All right. So let's see if there's any other questions here. Let's see. I think that's gonna do it for now. So that's gonna do. I think it's gonna do it for today's show. Everybody, it's really good stuff, really good conversation, lots of great questions here in the chat today. And of course, a lot of good intro on Syracuse. I thought that was fun. Tonight, 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern, you're going to have the IB Nation Sports Talk Show with Sean Stiers, and I believe it's Sean and Jesse tonight. And then tomorrow, Ryan and I'll be back. We will start kind of looking at our statistical breakdown of the actual matchup of how the Notre Dame offense matches up in different areas against the Syracuse defense, how the Notre Dame defense matches up against Syracuse offense, and then, of course, the individual matchups that will impact those different areas. IB Nation Sports Talk Wednesday night and Thursday night as well. Ryan and I'll be back on Thursday at 1 o'clock to talk about the keys to victory. And then our Friday show will probably still be at 1. That may be a recorded show that Ryan will play live. Ryan will be there, answer questions, but I've got a 7.5-hour drive. I'm actually driving to Syracuse this weekend, so it's about a 7.5-hour drive, so I may leave before the show. So it may be a recorded show on Friday in regard to our prediction discussion, and then Ryan will just do some live stuff afterwards. Maybe Ryan and maybe get a co-host or something like that as well. So we shall see on that, or I may just record kind of a quick segment on the predictions to go somewhere else. So we'll figure that out on Friday because Ryan, your trip's about 4 hours. Mine's about 7.5, so we'll end up getting in town around the same time. So that's what our plan is. And of course, Saturday, I'll be part of the postgame show. Ryan will be on his way back home. So it'll be me, Vince, and Sean, and other people on the postgame show. And then, of course, we'll be back for Upon Further Review next week. So further review probably is going to be on Monday next week just because of the travel. I'm going to be driving back all day Sunday. So just prepare yourself for that as well. But that's what we got going on, everybody, which means tons of stuff. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I promise you, lots of great conversation. And, of course, when there is intel, there is scoop, we will put it on there as well. At least legitimate intel and scoop. We will definitely put it on there as well. So for Ryan, I'm Brian. You all have an awesome rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. Thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.